dragon screamed with rage that terrified every ounce of its body. It flew down towards another crew of ballista and burned most of them to the ground. In one fluent arc, it flew round and destroyed the remaining tray buckets. Its claws knocked off the top of one of the machines, its parts fleeing straight into some of his reserve troops, knocking down dozens. The dragon flew low, lower than it had done before, as it came down with terrible precision on another group of his archers. The whole group scattered as more of their comrades were set aflame. At the same time the cream one harassed his reserves, as they threw spears at it to keep it at bay as it flew close. Keeping its low altitude, the black dragon flew across his reserve infantry and left a path of death and destruction in its wake. His men were prepared enough to make sure the flames didn't spread anywhere and save their compatriots that had been on the edge of the fires. Yet nothing could be done for those directly hit by the fire. As it dove only 12 feet above the ground again towards a group of archers, he could hear the voice of Sir Willy's across the plain. "Aim for the rider. Shoot that dragon bitch out of the sky." The dragon passed over the group of archers with deathly precision, killing many amongst arrow fire from all sides. However, then the unthinkable happened. As the dragon once again gained height, a small figure fell from its back. It landed at the edge of the group of archers. Both beasts let out a cry of pain and fear, as they both raced towards the fallen body of Daenerys Targaryen. The black one landed next to it, breathing fire at every direction, scattering all men in its vicinity. His archers kept the cream one from landing as it sought for a safe way towards its mistress. The black dragon raged and screeched. It pulled 2 soldiers in two with its claws, while another one was devoured between its black teeth. All across the plain, men shouted for the remaining ballista to reload and fire towards the monstrous beast. One bolt bounced off the scales of its back, while another fell just short. Still the dragon screeched, using its body to protect its mistress. The cream one screamed too but couldn't land as more arrows found its way towards its wings. Then an enormous roar could be heard. He turned towards the black dragon and saw it had been hit in the leg by a ballista bolt. The dragon half rolled over, still protecting the underlying body with its scales. Then another one hit, and a third and a fourth. Amongst ground-shaking roars and black fire, the great dragon went down and its head hit the ground. Still, his enemies shot their projectiles. None wanted to take any risks, as the maw could still be seen to move. After 5 or 6 more bolts hit the dragon, they finally stopped. The cream dragon screamed, as it tried to gain height. It looked towards the body of its fallen brother. When Drogon went down, he finally rolled away from his mistress. Both man and dragon could finally see the lifeless body of Daenerys Targaryen. She seemed to have fallen towards her death. The screech the cream dragon let out sounded more like pain and sorrow than anger and rage. It let out a huge flame of pale shot gold mixed in with orange and red and flew off towards the north. None said a word, as it slowly flew out of sight. He looked over the carnage in his back lines. At least 400 men were dead, hundreds more were wounded. Only 30 or so ballista were still standing, while all of the tray buckets had been thoroughly destroyed. The only sounds that could be heard were those of dozens of men retching or outright throwing up after witnessing this horrible spectacle. The shock, awe and fear were still visible on everyone's face. At last, it started to dawn on him that they might have just been witnesses to the last charge of the race of dragons. Let us pray it was the last. Suddenly, he realized he still had a battle to win. He looked towards the fighting. It seemed Jon had managed to destroy their right flank and was trying to charge down the Unsullied, while their left still held firm. Parts of the Vale cavalry were still reforming, as he could also see many had fled the battlefield. Others in smaller groups had successfully charged off their archers. It seemed their reserves had already been committed and were now fighting alongside the mercenaries and Unsullied against both his center and left infantry as well as his left cavalry. "Small Jon!" he shouted. The Umber quickly strode over to him. "Yes, Your Grace." "Take command of the reserve cavalry and charge around the right into their sides. I want you to mop up those freedmen with a charge that will inspire songs for the ages. Can you do that for me?" The loyal giant grinned and nodded his head. "It shall be done." He ran over towards his horse and fluently jumped on its back. "You heard the king, you lazy fuckers. Let's go kill those Isozi scum. Who's with me?" he bellowed. Hundreds of horsemen roared back in approval and soon they were off, all others following in order. Lady Mormont and the heavy infantry soon ran after them, as they were ordered to strengthen and rotate the center of the line. After all they had seen, all seemed happy at the relatively easy task of fighting unsullied instead of dragons. Some of his loyal guards stayed around him with Tob bringing him another tunic and some armor that had been taken from a fallen Riverlander knight. He looked over to where the body was laying, curious to see how he had died without his armor burning. In shock, he realized the man had been struck by an arrow in the face. He looked around and similar bodies could be seen scattered around the nearby fields. The arrows that had been so direly needed to bring down the dragons had been shot in all directions. Dozens of his men had been killed by friendly fire. It was a small price to pay for 2 dead dragons and the end of Daenerys Targaryen, but it still saddened him to no end. These men hadn't needed to die. They didn't even die for their land or honor. They were simply struck down by a stray arrow from one of their allies whilst looking up at the scenes that had unfolded in the skies. Grey Wind re-emerged too. The direwolf had ran from the dragon fire, knowing full well there was nothing he could have done to help. His companion tried to ease his pain by softly licking his arm and shoulder and he thankfully petted him on his giant head, simply glad that he was all right. With the help of To and Sir Donal Locke, he dressed himself. His shoulder hit like hell and the burn wounds were severe. His movement wasn't obstructed, so that was a good thing. Even though some of the wounds would perfectly heal, he knew immediately some of them would form scars he would have to carry for the remainder of his life. He couldn't help but think it could have been much worse. He looked over towards the burned remains of his former friend. He wanted to drape his cloak over the body, but only now realized it had mostly burned away. His men must have doused the fire when he was still in a daze on the ground. Sir Donal saw him look and unclasped his own cloak and put it over him. He was family to me, did you know that? The knight reminisced aloud. We were only distantly related through my grandmother, who was a Marndale, but we always got along well. Our lands border each other and we met often. He even brought young John along to Oldcastle once or twice. He was a good man. He convinced his father's cousin to knight me after I helped him with a bandit problem a decade back. He will be sorely missed. Their small group replied. I'll make sure his bones find his way home. It is what Lord Wyman will want. All of his companions agreed with the idea and none said another word. He looked over the fields and to his shock, he saw Sir Willis ride over towards them on his horse after directing most of the archers towards the fighting. The knight stopped alongside him. Your Grace, are you all right? Why aren't you leading the charge? He looked him over. And if I may be so blunt, what are you wearing? I must say that Riverlander surely isn't your style. He forced himself to muster a small smile at that, but it wasn't a sincere one. The dragon came down upon us. It almost got me. I got burns across my arm and shoulder, but I'll manage. Yet, I don't wish to lift anything with that arm for the moment, not even ice. Small John has command of the reserve. You were hit by dragon fire? The heir to White Harbor asked. He nodded. You survived it. That is not a tale many will be able to tell. The knight grinned, trying to lift the mood. After all, he had had command of the ballista and archers that had taken down those dragons. It was his task to break the horrible news. Sir Willis, I am sorry to tell you just how right you are. Your brother was standing next to me when the dragon flew down. He didn't make it. He told him, as he waved at the body under the lock cloak. The fat knight's eyes went wide. No, you can't mean. Wendell. No. The man exclaimed, as he jumped off the horse. He lifted up the upper part of the cloak and recoiled at the sight of his brother's charred remains. He fell back into the dirt. Wendell. That is what's left of my brother. My little brother. He's dead. The grown man howled, pain and anguish strewn across his face. Without saying a word, Sir Donal simply clasped the man in a bear hug. The proud Marndale wailed for his brother then, uncaring about anyone or anything. He knew how he felt. The day he had been told about his father's death something had broken inside of him. Yet, that was only after already knowing of his wound and capture. He wouldn't know what he'd do if John, Bran or Rickon were to die out of nowhere. He walked over to his loyal vassal and put a hand on his shoulder. You didn't know it at the time, but you have already avenged him. You brought both her and her dragon down. Wendell would be proud of you. He told the knight, who was 20 years his elder. Sir Willis followed his eyes to the corpses of both Daenerys and her dragon Drogon. He nodded in thanks, as he let go of Sir Donal. I will still wet my blade in the blood of her subjects before the day is at an end. He growled. Join the front line, if you wish. You have done more than enough. It's partially because of you that I'm still standing here. If you have need for additional revenge, you have my leave to go and claim it. The Mandalier looked at him with gratitude and grim determination in his eyes. Without saying a word, he climbed back on his horse and rode towards the line. Sir Donal looked conflicted at his distant kinsman. Go, he simply told him. Make sure he doesn't get himself killed. House Mandalay doesn't need to lose 2 of its sons today. The Lockheir bowed and ran for his horse, quickly galloping after Sir Willis. He looked at the 2 horsemen as they rode away and saw how Smalljan's charge was in the process of wrapping up the entire enemy left. He looked over towards his friends and protectors. I should be there when their lines collapse or are encircled. The army needs to see me as we finish this. All of them looked at him in doubt, but none contradicted him. Oliver brought around his horse and helped him get on it without using his burned shoulder or arm too much. His loyal squire attached ice to the saddle of his white destrier and all of his friends mounted up as well. Together, they rode on towards the fighting. When they arrived, both enemy flanks had been destroyed. Some 8,000 or so enemies were still fighting on in a single group. Half of them looked to be unsullied, their spear lines expertly protecting their rear and parts of their sides. The others were a mixture of freedmen and mercenaries. They doggedly fought on, which surprised him until he saw who led them. Sir Barristan could be seen on the front line, hacking his way through Valyman soldiers. After assessing the situation, he quickly took control. He ordered the cavalry to pull back and simply cut off the enemy's avenues of retreat. Their charges into the walls of spears were too costly. The charges did have an effect, but the Unsullied neither moved nor panicked. They didn't care how many died, they just fought on. This meant that all horsemen who penetrated enemy lines were killed off soon after every time, no matter the damage be inflicted. He ordered the archers to assemble all around the enemy position. When they were in position, he ordered the horns to sound for an orderly retreat. His troops disengaged in orderly fashion and came to a halt in a crescent formation some 150 feet from the enemy. Both armies stared at each other, as they took the time to gather their breath. Your queen and her dragons are dead. Surrender now and you Essozi will be allowed to travel back towards Essos. A messenger on horseback shouted towards them by his instruction. The Unsullied's answer came swift and there was no way to mistake their intent. A throwing spear hit the messenger's horse square in the flank. Horse and rider went down and as the horse lay dying, the latter scurried away towards the line when another former slave soldier stepped forward to aim his spear directly at him. So, they chose death. He sadly thought. So much useless carnage and all that for a dead girl's pride and ambition. He sighed and gestured for the hornblowers to blow the signal. From every direction, archers let loose in one terrifying volley. At least 2,000 arrow shafts flew through the air. There was no safe place to hide, no way to turn your shield to block them all. All around their formation, enemies were killed. When a second volley flew through the air, the army advanced. They abandoned all positions and charged right towards his royal standard in a mad dash to still secure victory. Hundreds dropped in the time it took them to reach his lines. On the front they were awaited by the cream of his army, which had protectively positioned themselves in front of him. Lady Mage's heavy infantry had formed up together with the toughest fighters from both the north and the Riverlanders and a huge battle broke out. He could see Sir Barristan, spearheading the charge with a group of Unsullied and they cut through his line like a knife through butter. Their rear lines were decimated by his archers and any stragglers were ridden down by Jon's cavalry, but those at the front charged like beasts possessed. Most were stopped in their tracks by his elite infantry, but the famed knight still pushed on. Next to him, he could see the Kingsguard eunuch that had been standing behind Daenerys at the negotiations yesterday. As they got closer and closer, the group was engaged by his elite guard. The eunuch was engaged by Patrek Malister and Sir Lucas Blackwood, while the Unsullied were stopped by his heavy guardsmen. Still, Sabaristan pushed on. He could see the knight was determined to die on this battlefield today. He just wanted to succeed in his mission and take him with him. At last, after ending the lives of 2 more Stark guardsmen prematurely, he was stopped by the combined efforts of Lady Mormont, Lord Umber and their heirs helped by Owen Norrie. No ordinary knight would even have lived long enough for it to be mentioned against those 5, but Sabaristan was no ordinary knight. He kept running around and dodging, so they couldn't use their full number against him. He did manage in distracting his guard long enough for half a dozen Unsullied to get through to him. Tor raced forward and engaged one, flanked by Oliver who stopped another. Their heavy armor quickly giving them the edge in the fight. The other 4 didn't care about their comrades. They had but a singular purpose, kill him. They had forgotten about one thing though, his direwolf. Grey Wind growled loudly and jumped the Unsullied from the side. One went down before they noticed what was going on, his throat ripped out with deadly precision. A second tried to stab him, but Grey simply squatted away the spear before biting off the man's arm and leaving his screaming form to bleed out. The other 2 went into stance, slowly walking away from each other in a wide circle to try and attack the direwolf from both sides. His companion made a sound that suspiciously sounded like a scoff, before he bolted at the left one. He jumped on the high-held shield, using his body weight to topple him over as he scratched and clawed apart the man's light armor. The right one looked between his companion and him and decided to make a charge for him. He tried to turn his horse away, but it was too late. Grey, help! His mind reached out and suddenly he could see through the direwolf's eyes. He saw the mauled remains of the Isozi soldier under him and could taste the metallic taste of his blood in his mouth. He quickly turned around and saw the Isozi advancing on his body, limply swaying on top of his horse. Save him now, all his instincts screamed. He wasted no second and attacked. It took him only 2 jumps before he hit the Unsullied soldier in the rear. By instinct, his teeth went around his neck from behind and he broke it right through. He let the lifeless body fall through his teeth and looked up. He felt his tongue hang out of his maw, as he panted from the exertion. He looked upon his body and wished himself back there. Suddenly his eyes opened. He could see the form of Grey Wind closely in front of him, arched over a death Isozi soldier. His tongue was hanging from his mouth and both shared a look. He nodded at him in thanks and the wolf just shrugged as if to say, do it any time you need. By now all Unsullied soldiers were taken care of or engaged too thoroughly for them to advance again. Tor and Oliver ran back to his sides, the latter wearily glancing at Grey Wind and the carnage around him. He looked back to the legendary fight in front of him. He could see how Sabaristan had been wounded by an arrow in his left arm, probably before the fight ever started. Even lightly wounded, the man's sword still flashed quicker than his eyes could follow. However, his friends worked closely together. Every time he broke through one's defense, he had to pivot to block another's attack, thereby never being able to finish one of them off. That was until Daisy made a big mistake. With a twist of his wrist, Sabaristan cut her across the forearm, making her drop her mace. He swatted away Lady Mage's attack to protect her daughter and advanced on the heir of Bear Island. With horror, he could see the blade flash down. It would have killed her, if not for Owen Norrie. The man threw his body between them. His sword caught Sabaristan's, but because of the angle and force behind it, it still hit home. The steel drove deeply into Owen's shoulder. The hill clansman went down heavily wounded and Daisy screamed it out. However, the confusion Owen caused with the Kingsguard knight was enough for the Umber men to intervene. Smalljan's mailed fist hit the knight square in the face from the side, as his father's sword cut through the air in a deadly arc. Sabaristan only barely dodged it, but he was still off balance. Smalljan's sword clashed with the elder knight and he pushed him back only for his father to try another overhead killing blow. This time, the opponent's sword came up to block it and the powerful blow simply shattered the knight's worn-out sword. The blow cut deep into his shoulder and the knight went to his knees. He could see how he said something to the Great Yon, but he couldn't hear it from this far. Sabaristan let his head hang and Umber simply sidestepped, after which he pushed his great sword through the opening in the armor under the man's armpit. So, died one of Westeros' most famous knights. He died with his sword in hand on the battlefield, as he tried to avenge his fallen monarch. It was a suitable death for a knight of his standing and order. A final deed to wash away the fact he had survived the Targaryens at the Trident, he imagined. He rode over towards his friend, as the Unsullied were now falling like flies. Their light armor was no match for experienced heavy infantry once their lines were broken and their momentum stopped. Daisy sat by Owen, who was bleeding heavily. Both Umbermen simply pushed her out of the way, as they cut off Owen's armor and tunic. Daisy tried to fight back, protecting Owen, but Lady Mage restrained her. They need to close the wound, or he'll bleed out before the healers ever arrive, she told her daughter. This made her stop her struggling back, as she simply looked on towards the scene. Fire, I need some fucking fire here now, the eldest Umber shouted. Not much later, a guard brought a torch over towards them. While Smalljan restrained his lifelong friend, Gratian put his dagger in the flames until it heated up. Once the blade was red hot, he walked over towards their wounded comrade. Do it. Nuri spit out weakly. Put something in his mouth so he won't bite his tongue off. Gratian ordered to no one in particular. Oliver came and pushed the shattered remains of an unsullied spear between his teeth. The Gratian nodded. Stoically, he pushed the blade against Owen's shoulder. His scream cut through the bone, making many soldiers turn around towards the spectacle. The steel hissed against his flesh, but the wound closed. The rest is for the maesters to work out, but now he at least has a chance, he told Daisy, as he cooled his dagger in a bucket of water before putting it away in its sheath. He looked over the face of his friend, who had lost consciousness because of the pain. Please let him survive. He had lost enough friends already. Chapter 61, The End of Dragons. 301 AC. John. He turned his horse back towards the battlefield and took a few deep breaths. They had destroyed the enemy cavalry on the flank and had just devastated the enemy infantry. Their charge had been one of the most brutal ones he had ever experienced. The Gratian had opened his lines and pulled in most of the sellswords and many of the freedmen into a fierce melee. At the same time the majority of the freedmen were still pushing forward to join in too. They had slammed into their side and rear at the same time and had created an absolute bloodbath. In one charge over 1,000 freedmen had been wounded or killed, many times that number scattering in all directions completely breaking the flank. His cavalry rode some of those down. The heavy infantry had followed this up by encircling those fighting in the melee and bringing them down from all sides. Less than a fourth of the flank stayed intact, pulling back to the center and joining in with them. By now the enemy reserve force had arrived there and had stabilized everything. He led his men forward and charged them anyway. This charge was the complete opposite of the last one. It hadn't connected well from the start and they were soon met by unsullied spears. He swatted away a spear with his sword and quickly yelled for his men to retreat. He reformed his troops once again but sent 2 portions of his force away under Domeric and Harry on to disperse their archers and hold them from firing. He stood tall on his stirrups, as he looked for help from the Vale cavalry. All he could see was disorganized groups of horses running around in the distance. He sent 2 riders to order them to reform and help charge the enemy force from all sides. A big roar could be heard from the back lines and he looked towards it. Flames of black fire light up the sky there, but then they stopped. He was curious on what was going on, but he had a job to do himself. Besides, these roars did not have the same effect on him as the shriek from a few minutes before had. Then, the sky had filled with yellow flames instead of black ones. The sound had also been different, almost as if mixed with panic instead of defiance. He had felt a strange desire to go there then, much stronger than he had now. However, he had a duty to rob and so he had focused on the enemy infantry. Once more, he prepared his soldiers for a charge. They rode towards the enemy and from the corner of his eye, he could see a group of 200 to 300 knights of the Vale doing the same from the other sides. This charge did connect, but the Unsullied had been ready for it. Their spears wreaked havoc on his riders. He had to pull his forces back again, even before he himself made contact with the enemy. As his forces reformed back on the hill, he was figuring out what to do when he suddenly saw the reserve moving up. The reserve cavalry charged the other flank to devastating effect. His instincts kicked in and he circled around with a good 1,000 or so horsemen and charged in after them. They quickly finished the job and the whole flank scattered. Black Fear slashed the throats of multiple freedmen, but most of his victims were struck down in the back as they tried to run away. He tried to search for his brother, but he couldn't find him and neither could Ghost. This worried him greatly, as he feared the worst, until he asked an officer wearing Stark colors. The king was wounded by the dragons and ordered Lord Smallgen to lead the charge. Lord Torren and others of his grace's friends are caring for him, but he seemed out of any danger. His direwolf is also with him. He thanked the man profusely for the names and would try to remember his name to reward him after the battle. He rode back from the lines until he knew he was out of any danger and watched into Ghost. He reached out to Grey Wind. For some reason they could always know approximately where they were. He felt a slight pull somewhere across the hill where Ghost thought his brother was. This seemed to corroborate the soldier's story. When he was back into his own body, he let out a breath he hadn't known he had been holding. Both cavalry forces pulled back and he sent a guard to Smallgen to make sure he integrated the Valiman into his force. Before any of them could charge the center again, a message from Rob arrived. It ordered them to pull back and make a wide perimeter around the enemy force. They were ordered to protect the archers and kill any who tried to flee. However strange the orders were, he knew better to question Rob's commanding capabilities in the heat of battle and did as he was told. After he had done so, he simply looked on from the hill he waited on. He saw the infantry disengage and for a while both sides halted. He couldn't see why, were they talking to each other? However, soon it all changed. Dozens of horns were blown, and a barrage of arrows filled the air. Thousands of arrows were fired and they took a deadly toll on the enemy's light-armored elite force. After the second volley, the enemy advanced. In a mad charge, they ran towards the center of the line. His eyes were constantly drawn to somewhere above the lines. In the center there, he could see the Stark direwolf flow proudly in the air. It must be Ghost's connection to Grey Wind. He knew Rob was there and they were marching on them, but he could do nothing. He had his orders. Hundreds of enemies fell down before ever reaching their lines and they ran forward like an uncontrollable horde. When they reached their lines, he just gasped. Instead of engaging in combat, they just ran through. He could see enemies fall on all sides by arrows, while the main body seemed to be moving inside their lines at an unimaginable speed. He knew what those fighters on their lines were capable of. To move through at this pace meant the enemy must be being killed by the hundreds. Still, they pushed through towards the direwolf banner. After a while, they seemed to slow down. He couldn't see what happened next though, as by now many of the remaining freedmen and mercenaries were trying to flee, leaving only the unsullied behind. He signaled for his cavalry to come into action and they rode forward. They charged them down as if it was nothing more than child's play. The enemies were spread out, exhausted, and many had even dropped their weapons. This was no fight, it was a clean-up. Yet, it needed to be done. With no way back to Essos, they would just reave and plunder the Stormlands if they weren't put down. After splitting a man's skull with Black Fear, he pulled on his reins and looked up at the battle. There everything seemed to have started to quiet down. The front wasn't moving any longer and the enemy seemed to be thinning. "I'll end this," he thought, and he shouted for a few hundred horsemen to reform. Not much later, they barreled into the back of the remaining Unsullied, killing hundreds and throwing the last of them in complete disarray. He could see bodies everywhere around him. Many of them not from his own doing, but from the arrow fire that had continuously peppered their opponents. Yet, the former slave soldiers stayed true to their reputation. Even with horrible losses and their formation shattered, they still fought on. Then their heavy infantry marched forward from all sides, aided by those of the Vale. Before his eyes, Unsullied everywhere were overpowered by their more heavily armored West AOC counterparts. The Assosi's main strength was their discipline and ability to fight in group against oncoming enemy armies. Once all that was scattered, all that remained were skilled fighters, who were heavily outclassed in armor, equipment and experience by all West AOC veterans in these kinds of fights. Soon, it was all over. He rode on towards his brother's banner and found Rob there. He seemed wounded and was dressed in some weird Riverlander armor. At first, he was concerned, but when his brother saw him he smiled to him and a weight lifted from his shoulder. It was clear he was going to recover in time. Ghost and Grey Wind greeted each other playfully. While Grey Wind was happily yapping at his brother, Ghost just silently jumped around with him. He dismounted and clasped Rob in a hug, however the latter screamed it out in response. "My shoulder, it was burned. Do not touch it, please," he stammered out with tears in his eyes. He apologized profusely, but his brother just waved it away. He greeted some of their friends and hugged Daisy, who sat by Owen's side. In tears, she explained him what had happened. He looked over the lifeless body of Sabaristan and had to think of Bran. Once, before all of this had started, his younger brother had idolized the knight. What would he say when they had to tell them they were responsible for his death? What would they say against any of them after all these years? He had fought in the army responsible for his aunt's death. Did that make him a kinslayer? He could shake none of these melancholy thoughts, and to his surprise the faint pull in the back of his mind hadn't gone away. He looked upon Ghost and Grey Wind and even closed his eyes to take control of his companion for a second. Nothing changed. His eyes were drawn to the back lines, where the artillery had stood, and he felt drawn towards it. He deliberated on what to do. He looked around for a while and realized there was no real need for him here now. Others could take over his duties easily. He walked over to Rob. "Brother," he whispered in his ear as he clasped his arm again. "I need to go up the hill. I don't know why or how, but something is pulling me towards the area. It feels as if it's beckoning me to come. I think I need to do this, alone. Will you and the army manage for a while without me?" His brother looked to him, a frown clear upon his face. He said nothing for the longest time, but finally broke the silence. "Is it like with Ghost?" But also no. It's similar, but still different. It's very weak and at the same time much more demanding. I don't know how to explain it," he honestly replied. "Do you think it is?" Rob asked. "I don't know, but I intend to find out." His brother nodded. "Are you sure you don't need a companion? I could send Grey with you, if you want." He smiled back. "No, this is something that I need to do alone. I'll be safe, I promise." They looked at each other before they lightly hugged again, Rob only using his good shoulder and arm this time. "Good luck, brother. I'll see you in the command building when you give your report on your side of the battle." He simply laughed and walked away. He rode over the hill, initially intent on make for the center of the carnage. It was there he could see the body of the black dragon, and he imagined his aunt's body to be as well. Yet, as he got closer, he realized that he wasn't pulled over there. The closer he got, the less faint it became. He was pulled to the side away from the battlefield and the siege engines. He rode over a small hill, some 100 feet away from where everything had happened. There he saw marks of an incredible crash. Trees had been thrown down and earth had been uprooted. At the end of a small trail-like scar across the earth, a majestic green-scaled dragon lay. He looked at its corpse and felt the pull growing stronger. He rode his horse towards it, yet it seemed skittish and after a while refused to go further. He rode it back a bit and tied its leash up to a half-destroyed tree and calmed it. Then he went further on foot. When he finally reached the beast, he admired its jade-green scales. The deepness and liveliness of the color. Even dead, he could feel the power the beast radiated. Was this how his ancestors had felt when they thought themselves capable of conquering Westeros? Was this how his aunt had felt? He stretched out his hand, intent on touching the scales, but something in him didn't dare to disturb the body. Powerful as it looked, it was also highly mutilated. Broken off arrows were stuck everywhere, mostly in its wings. Its right wing was half torn off and he could see the remnant of a ballista shaft sticking out of the side of its belly. The beast must have suffered greatly at the hands of their artillery. For some reason, the thought alone made him sad, but he didn't understand why. As he walked across the side of the dragon, starting from its tail, he finally reached its head. He admired the beauty of it, and in his mind's eye he compared it to the skulls he had seen in the Red Keep. It was smaller than most, but no less menacing. The flesh and scales gave it a beauty he would have never been able to imagine. He stepped closer, studying every piece of the beast. Its maw was closed, so he could not see its teeth. How large would they be? He wondered. He was only a foot away from the dragon and looked right at what would have been its right eye. What color would it have been? While he was in the middle of trying to figure out any of the answers, his whole world suddenly changed. The dragon moved but an inch, but its eye opened. The large bronze slit looked like a portal into another world. The radiation of power that he had felt increased tenfold and he fell back on the ground in shock and admiration. The beast snorted and a little steam came out of his nostril. The bronze eye looked saddened and pained, and for some reason he understood what he was asked. He slowly stood up and walked back over. He stretched out his hand towards its snout, only stopping about an inch from it. He looked towards the dragon in confirmation and it weirdly seemed to nod. He let his hands touch it and for the briefest of seconds it seemed to nuzzle into his hand as it closed its eye. This all changed when he opened it again. Suddenly, he was somewhere else. It was dark. He smelled smoke and smelled fire, and all of a sudden something broke around him. He crawled out of it, opening eyes he didn't knew were closed. Small shrieks from his brothers could be heard and he himself let one out himself. He crawled towards the form of a naked girl, which he in shock realized as a younger version of his aunt. He climbed on her flesh, two others the size of lizards doing the same. The vision changed. He could see his aunt again. Her hair had been burned off and was only beginning to grow back. She held him and spoke words ingrained in his soul. "The green one shall be Rorigal, for my valiant brother who died on the green banks of the Trident." More vision changes. Flying through a desert. People admiring him and his brothers in a strangely ancient city. His aunt receiving the news of Robert's death. He felt her joy and vengefulness in that moment. He saw men on great marble thrones, as he felt proud that he was allowed to sit on Daenerys' shoulder. He saw men trying to take his black brother and their mother screaming for them to burn them, Dracarys she screamed. Visions of men burning and dying and the smell and the taste of their flesh filled his senses. Suddenly he was in a dark crypt. He and his cream-colored brother were chained up. They were larger and they were angry. He saw himself snap at their mother's companions. At night they cried for their mother, but she barely ever came. He saw a boy with a red sun on his tunic that smelled like peppers and sand. The boy tried to come closer to him and tried to befriend him. He was not worthy, his dragon fire engulfed the boy. He saw foreign armies burn under a city and suddenly a sound that seemed to control his mind. He was taken away from his mother and he screamed but couldn't resist to follow a ship with a golden kraken. Then he was in the middle of the sea and suddenly his black brother and mother arrived. They burned the ship with the kraken, freeing him from his mental prison. Together they burned many of the other ships. Another sea battle, an island with a fortress he took control over. Then he saw a huge army. Its banners were wolves and fish and falcons. His mother spoke to him. She asked them for their help. He and his brothers screeched their support. They flew out. He smelled the burned corpses of men and horses. Suddenly he saw a larger banner with a grey wolf on a white field. Around him were machines that could hurt them and hundreds of four-leggers that shot sticks at him. He could feel their stings on his wings and saw his cream brother get severely hurt. He felt his rage as he burned machines and men alike, while his big black brother went to attack the wolf. Suddenly, he felt more and more stings and panic engulfed him. He tried to climb higher and screamed for aid. His brothers reacted. He felt their presence and the presence of his mother, but also that of someone else. Someone that was worthy. He screamed again for any of their help as he desperately tried to climb higher. Suddenly a massive pain erupted from his belly and he started to descend. He looked down and saw a much larger stick had struck him. He screeched from pain and despair and tried to wiggle it out, but it wouldn't budge. It had penetrated too deeply. More and more small pain erupted from all over his body as smaller sticks kept hitting him. Then he received a massive hit to the chest. He fell down from the sky, as everything hurt. He hit the ground and felt himself become weaker and weaker. He heard the screams of his brothers for a while, until suddenly the presence of his mother and big brother disappeared. He heard the sorrowful screams of his other brother but didn't have the strength to respond. His younger brother felt sorry and ashamed when he flew away, but he didn't blame them. There was nothing for him here and he had seen the wounds of the large sticks that had gone right through his wings. He hoped that his brother managed to escape. Suddenly all of that went away. His eyes were closed. He felt life slowly slipping away from him. Until he felt a presence nearby. With all of his remaining strength he opened his eyes and there stood a man. He didn't look like Mother, but he felt like him. He radiated heat, much more than the other four-leggers did. It was the presence he had felt when he had screamed for help. He wondered who he was and wished to tell him his life's tale. Suddenly he was back in his own body and he was once again in the dirt in front of the dragon. It looked at him with pain and loss in his eyes, but also with curiosity. He felt connected with the beast. No, not a beast. He was a dragon. He knew he had shown him the most important parts of his life. How, he did not know. He had never heard of Targaryens or dragons doing any of this. Yet, to his knowledge there had never been a Targaryen walk with a dragon before either. Maybe that was the reason. He looked at the bronze eye and stood up. I am Jon Jaehaerys Targaryen. Do you remember the memory of your mother when she gave you your name? When she named you Rhaegal, after her fallen brother Rhaegar? The dragon blinked. I am Rhaegar's last living son. He married a wolf and I was born and hidden away after his death. The dragon seemed to accept this, but at the mention of the wolf a flash of fear went through his eyes. He remembered the visions and felt sorry for him. He walked back over and stroked his face and the scales of his neck. I know, I'm sorry. I didn't know back then, but now I know. Rhaegal seemed to accept this and he simply closed his eyes. He could feel the dragon's pain and his loneliness and grief over his lost ones. Shush, he told him. I am here, you are not alone. I will take care of your mother and bury her in the way of our ancestors. I will tell stories of your bravery and that of your brothers to my sons. I will take your body with me and bury it with honor. Your valiance will never be forgotten. You are one of the last dragons that roamed this world. Everybody will fear your memory, I will make sure of that. I promise. The dragon hissed for the first time. It sounded pained and broken up but, somehow, he knew what it meant. Thank you, Jaehaerys Targaryen. He held the massive head of the dragon for a long time after. Long after he had felt the power it radiated slowly disappear. He sat there and he wept. He wept for a companion that could have been with him for the rest of his life, if only the cards had been different. He wept for the loss this world now bore, without the majesty of these dragons. He wept for the fate of his father's family and he wept for the stupidity of his aunt and the loss of their dynasty. He had never felt so connected to his father's side before as he did now, but he would never go back on his promise. The Targaryen line had ended with his aunt. He would take a new name. He would learn his sons and grandsons to be loyal to his mother's memory, a stark memory, not to that of his father. Yet, they would never forget the latter either. He was a son of both ice and fire. He was the song his parents had made, for better or for worse. His children would continue that song, yet the days of the fire were over. They would forever follow their icy forebears and be true to the north. The fire will remain hidden in their blood for eternity. It will not end, not truly. It will disappear until it is inconsequential, yet something of his father's line would always survive in their blood. That, he owed them all at least. He stayed there for a long while, looking over the corpse of what could have been his mount in another universe. It was not to be. He could do nothing for the dragon in life, yet he would honor his promises in its death. Finally, he strode over to his horse and rode back to their camp. All around him, men were already feasting and drinking to the end of the dragons. He couldn't find it in himself to match their spirits. He was sad and distraught. Whatever the history books would tell, for him today was not a good day. His melancholy complexion combined with his Targaryen armor earned him more than a few strange looks, especially from the southerners, but he did not care. He wore it proudly. These were his last days as the last ever member of House Targaryen. A house that had done terrible, but incredible things. He would not hide anymore. It would all end soon as he took a new name, until then they had to suck it up or, if they didn't, they could take their problems up with Blackfyr instead. He walked into the command building without saying a word. Everyone looked up, but none dared to say a word about where he had been or why he was late. Robb welcoming him with a nod and immediately continuing was enough to shut them all up. He listened to the losses of the battle and what had happened everywhere. The Vale had lost the most soldiers. Their cavalry had been decimated by the chaos after the dragon attack. The dragons hadn't even killed that many, less than 100 riders in total. Yet, the chaos of horses trampling and burning had caused a stampede that had killed many hundreds and wounded even more. Many had also deserted the battlefield then, but they were now returning to the camp in shame. The Vale had also taken the brunt of the initial fighting with the Unsullied. They had to endure their spear throws, as well as a long time battling their formation. The Riverlanders and Stormlanders were much better off, the latter losing parts of their cavalry in the same chaos the Vale had, but their infantry remaining largely intact against the freedmen. The northern troops had for once gotten the best of it. His quick charge against the freedmen had disintegrated their line, and the melee before that had heavily favored their heavy armor against their opponents. During the last final attack, the Unsullied has charged without care for their own lives and had been cut down by swords and arrows in droves. 7,000 had died for less than 500 casualties on their own part. It shocked him to hear that they had almost succeeded in getting to his brother, but all had turned out well enough. Great Yon heroically recalled the fight against Sabaristan Selmy, a fitting end for a legend of the sword. He shut of his mind when the tale of how the dragons went down was told. All he heard was that all in all their casualties were acceptable. Around 400 archers and artillery crew, together with less than 100 heavy infantry, had been killed or very severely wounded in the back lines. He felt disgusted when everybody cheered they would take that for 2 dragons and the Dragon Keen any day. After the battle, they had sacked Daenerys' camp. There they had found over 100 freedmen sick in their beds. After a few interrogations, it seemed the Asozi couldn't stand the climate or food here. Apparently, it had been far worse on the Stepstones, which finally explained her long delay on the island before her invasion. She had only left after most of her children had either healed or perished from their ordeal. Those freedmen that had managed to escape had scattered to the south and east. Come morning, they would be hunted to extinction. There was no place for them here or anywhere else. They could not serve in the Night's Watch, as they neither spoke the language nor respected the culture. Every single one of their opponents would die, except for those of West AOC descent that accepted the black. They were few and many prominent ones had been killed in the fighting, including Lord Sunglass and Sir Jorah Mormont. The latter's body would be brought to Bear Island and laid to rest with his father, out of respect for the latter. However, when discussing noble casualties, his world shattered once more. Not many nobles had died, as most casualties were footmen or archers. Only the Vale had suffered many. The heirs of houses Redfort and Waynwood, staunch supporters of Lord Harold, had died. Lords Dutton and Ruthermont had also perished, as had many younger sons, nephews or cousins from many of the Vale houses. Among them Sir Andor Royce's young cousin, showing that nobody had been spared. The noble casualties from the Riverlands were minimal. A Blackwood brother of the late Lord Tytos had been killed, as well as minor members of lower lordly houses. The Stormland's only memorable death was Lord Swan. He had died with the cavalry, but no others had been mortally wounded. The North's noble losses were small, yet the losses would be heavily felt. Lord Flint, good friend to the Great Yon and one of Robb's loyal supporters, had succumbed to his wounds. A few Locke and Flint cousins had also died, but none of them had shattered his world. What had, was the news that his mentor Sir Wendell Marndaly had died. The man had saved him from Lady Catelyn in Winterfell by bringing him with him. He had taught him more than he could remember, and together they had gone on many adventures all across the Bight and beyond. He had quickly walked over to Sir Willis Marndaly, who was standing with Harmond Umber and Sir Donal Locke. He silently grabbed the man in a hut and together they mourned his brother in silence. During the whole meeting he hadn't said a word. He had gestured to his commanders, Domeric and Harryon, to explain what had happened in his name. The latter had been wounded during a charge against the Unsullied and had broken his arm, but the healers had already looked at it and he would be well again in time. His silence changed when they started discussing the spoils of the battle. He didn't care about coin or valuables and who would get what. He never had, but suddenly one of those southern cunts brought up the dragons. Dragonbone was worth a fortune and he remembered them all. They had 2 full dragons to split open and distribute among them. This angered him beyond belief. No, he had simply said. Some had looked weirdly at him, but most hadn't heard or simply ignored him through the commotion. No, you will not desecrate their bodies even more than has already been done. He lashed out louder to everyone in the room. His tone was cold as ice, coming close to how Lord Eddard had commanded his lords, and it allowed no discussion. Yet, his face burned with a heat he had rarely felt. His ferocity clear to all in the room. Was this the famed wolf's blood? Or was it something else? Many looked at him in shock, among them Rob. He could see in his brother's eyes that he immediately understood that something had happened, but he couldn't ask him what in front of his lords. "Why do you care, Snow? You weren't even there when they fell." Lord Lips called out. "You will not touch them. That is final." He replied just as cold as before. "Are you finally starting to care for your own now that they're dead, boy? Better late than never, I guess." Lord Peaceberry went even further. His head saw red, and it took all of his self-control to stop him from ripping the man's head off. Ghost silently stalked forward towards the Lord, yet he bared his fangs in anticipation of his attack. More insults were thrown towards him from Valiman or Stormlanders, while all Northerners and most Riverlanders kept silent. Although many desired the riches the Dragonbone would bring them, they knew better to come between a direwolf and his objective. "Enough!" Rob screamed, accompanied by a loud and low growl from Grey Wind. He looked towards the lords that had insulted him. "The next one that speaks up against my brother in this manner will lose his tongue." "Ha, you would incite another war to satisfy the bastard's dragon fetishes. We all knew who he was. He has hid it well until now, but he had to show his true colors sooner or later." Lord Peaceberry spat out again. He realized the man was already drunk from feasting after the battle. Rob stood up and pushed himself through all nobles present until he was so close to the Storm Lord they could probably smell each other's breaths. "I would risk my kingdom for my brother, my lord." He spat out the last two words. "You see, wolves live in packs. You touch one of us, you touch them all. Unless you wish to start a blood feud against me, my house and my entire kingdom, I would advise you to apologize to my brother for questioning his loyalties and keep quiet for the remainder of this council. You have said more than enough. I will ask it only once." Rob's voice was as cold as his own, maybe even more so. An icy chill went through the room and all hairs on his body stood up straight. All across the room, men went to their weapons. Northerners preparing to square off against anyone willing to question their monarch's words. Lord Peaceberry looked towards his countrymen for help, but Lords Morrigan and Andrew Estermont forced all Stormlanders to keep quiet. Cornered and alone, the Storm Lord finally nodded. He slowly turned towards him. I'm sorry, Master Snow. It was not my place to question you, and I will not do so again." Rob looked at him and lifted an eyebrow to ask if this would do. He silently nodded, not trusting the words that would otherwise come out of his mouth. "My brother and I accept your apology. Now sit down and shut up, before I have you removed from this council anyway," his brother said, not even looking at the Storm Lord as he walked back to his chair. "Now, I think we were discussing the possibility of harvesting Dragonbone from the fallen corpses. I think it was John's turn to speak on the topic." He continued as nothing had ever happened, motioning at him to speak. "However, I think he would like to sheath his sword before doing so. It has come out by accident." Rob looked at him severely. The message in his eyes were clear. "I have your back, but you can't do this." He only now realized he had his hand on Blackfyr. The sword was halfway out of its scabbard and the light shone on its dark Valyrian steel. He exhaled loudly and slowly before putting the sword back and taking his hand off from the hilt. "These beasts are the last remnants of a majestic and magical world that is now dying. They needed to be destroyed. I always stood by that point. I helped create the plans that managed to take them down. I stood by my king and led the charges that broke my aunt's army. Never was my loyalty in any question. Yet, now that they are dead, I ask respect in their memory. I ask for my aunt to be cremated and her ashes to be scattered on Dragonstone. I ask for the bodies of these incredible and terrifying creatures to be respected and to not tarnish their memories. They were wrongly used by my aunt to wreak havoc and destruction on our peoples, and they have paid the price for it. Let them rest now, for they were the last dragons that will have roamed this world." Many were silent at that. He could see the inner battle on Sir Willy's face. He respected him wholeheartedly, but the loss of Sir Wendell made it difficult for him to speak up. "I'm sorry, King Stark, but you can't be serious about entertaining this idea. We would let a fortune get away from us, and for what? For the memory of fire-breathing lizards that killed our own. I cannot and will not support this. The coin could help rebuild all that the dragons have destroyed. It would give us the means to rebuild what their fires burned down. The young Lord Penrose addressed his brother. I entertain every possible idea, Lord Penrose. As I entertain yours. Rob responded evenly. What would happen to the bones anyway? Would your brother get them all? Just so you can sell them in a few years' time and make a fortune behind our backs. Lord Donijah spoke up. However, the latter's intervention clearly wasn't well received by either Sir Andrew or Lord Harold. However, many greedy or ambitious lords seemed to agree with the sentiment. If that's how you feel, I will waive away my house's right on any of the spoils of the battle for a portion of the corpses. I do not wish to steal from any of you and recognize the value these bones might possess. Maybe we could simply keep the skulls. The last question was clearly aimed at him. The whole discussion disgusted him, but he understood his brother's concerns. They had alliances and appearances to maintain. He had to give something. Yet, he would do all he could. Brother, he addressed Rob. I have fought in all of your battles. I even led your host for a while when you were incapacitated in the Westerlands. I have never asked you for anything and won't do it ever again if you grant me this, but I will ask for something now. I will relinquish my requests concerning the bones of the largest dragon, Drogon, my late aunt's mount. I will also relinquish my request for the bones of the last remaining dragon that is still out there, may his victor enjoy his spoils. Yet, I ask that their skulls remain intact and that they are sent to me. So, I can mourn them in the name of my dead family. Never will they roam Westeros again or claim or burn anything, yet their existence must never be forgotten. They were the last remnants of the Empire of Valyria. I would also request the third dragon's body to remain unharmed. I will ask this of you and nothing more until my dying breath. He went to his knees and bowed his head to show the severity of his request. Many among the room looked at him in shock. Why would you want the green dragon? Lord Bracken asked, perplexed. He simply looked up at the Riverlander. His name was Rorigal. He was named after my late father and he succumbed to his wounds in my arms after the battle. Just like Sir Barristan, he fought and died valiantly. He deserves the same respect the White Knight got. Now all started talking to each other. Lord Aston Selmy, formerly one of the greedy lords, looked towards him with resignation. He seemed to wonder if he could get respect for his dead kinsman without offering the dragon the same. He wasn't dead after all of that. Sir Willis asked him. No, he wasn't. He was mortally wounded and was hanging on for dear life when I found him. I stayed with him for hours, until long after he had died. I wish to give him the burial a wondrous creature such as him deserves. You were with it. You said you even held the monster. How come it didn't kill you? Smalljan asked. I don't think he could have, even if he wanted to. He was far too weak. He was dying. However, I don't think he would have, if he had the chance. He was no monster. He was a powerful creature. He didn't kill for sport, he killed to serve his mistress just like I killed to serve my king. I stayed with him in the end. No one, person or creature, deserves to die alone. He had to die for all of us to be safe, I understand that. Yet, I was thought to honor the valiant dead, even those on the other side. I was raised with the story of how the Sword of the Morning died fighting Lord Eddard. Did he leave his corpse to rot in the desert sun of dawn? No, he buried him with respect and brought his sword back to his family so they could mourn him and stay true to their traditions. That is what I plan to do, nothing less and nothing more. This story seemed to silence all of the Northern Lords. When he invoked his father's memory, all of them seemed to accept his explanation. So did many others from the Vale or Riverlands. Lord Dondarrion nodded along as well, his bonds to Housedane well known by now. Are you sure this is what you want, John? Aye. He replied proudly, as he lifted his head to look into his eyes. He was still on his knees before him. So be it. Does anyone challenge this idea? The bones of the Black Ones will be divided amongst the nobility of the Vale and the Stormlands. My own vassals will be compensated with other rewards. The rest of the spoils will be distributed as stipulated earlier, whilst my share will go to my vassals. Rob spoke, as he looked around the room. None dared to say a word. Many greedy lords looked amongst themselves, trying to find support to challenge the offer. Suddenly, an unexpected voice spoke up. Dragonstone accepts the offer, and I'm sure my brother and cousin would do the same if they were here. I also accept the ruling for the Dragon Queen. I will scatter her ashes across the courtyard of Dragonstone myself, if you ask it of me. She was also distant kin of me and mine. Just like you are. The new Lord Gendry Hammersmith stepped forward. Their eyes met and he nodded in respect. The blue-eyed lord reciprocated the gesture. I think Lord Gendry is right. The Queen would want it so. The Stormlands accept the ruling. Lord Andrew Estermont spoke up to the shock of many of the Storm Lords. However, both lords had distinguished themselves during the battle, especially Lord Hammersmith. Already tales were told about him being as great a warrior as his late father. All Storm Lords had been made to remember Robert when they saw Lord Gendry swing his hammer with deadly precision. House Tully accepts it as well. We have a lot to thank from Jon and his deeds. We will accept it in his name and the memory of the late Lord Eddard. Sir Brynden spoke up, challenging any of his countrymen to speak up against him. The Vale will not contest the idea either. Lord Harold spoke up. Sir Ander looked shocked at the sudden outburst but seemed content with the outcome, as did the older lords that had known his father. Rob nodded at them all. The North? He asked as he looked to his lords. I accept. Lord Harry on Karstark responded immediately. House Umber accepts as well. Smalljan spoke up, his father looking at him weirdly. In a weird twist of fate, the giant simply sighed and nodded. Many of the other nobles did the same, Domeric even going as far as to physically come stand by his side in a show of support. Then it is settled. Is there any other news? His brother ruled. A few letters arrived from Storm's End during the battle. I had them put aside and forgot about it until now. Sir Willis spoke up, as he walked over to give the unopened bundle to his king. Rob accepted it in silence. He opened it and looked at its contents. Willers Tyrell has defeated the Florents and their allies under the walls of Highgarden and captured its lord. A few days before, Lord Tarly managed to defeat House Crane and capture Red Lake in the process. It seems the Reach civil war is almost at an end. He sighed. Do we need to fear anything? Lord Morrigan asked. No, their armies are scattered, battered and far away. Moreover, they still have the Ironborn to deal with. Their troubles aren't over just yet. It is better that way. A good Reachman is a dead Reachman. The old lord remarked, many of the Storm Lords agreeing with the sentiment. Any other news? Lord Bracken asked. Rob went through the papers. It seems the conflict in the Westerlands is worsening. Tywin is becoming bolder and so are his opponents. Many houses that desperately wanted to stay neutral are turning their backs on him now, while his reprisals are becoming extremer by the day. This brought a grin on all their faces. Let those fuckers kill each other. By the time we arrive, only the gold will be left for us to grab. The great yawn boomed out to the joy of many. The first batches of prisoners have successfully arrived at the wall. They have sworn their vows and are being distributed between its garrisons under the watchful eyes of Lord Commander Denys Mallister and my forces. It also seems Lord Deddings has been raiding the northeastern part of the Reach to feed his forces and the people. His Chevorchis are seemingly decimating the territories around Tumbleton. He reports that by the time we get back a feast will be prepared for us in King's Landing, as the city will once again be filled to the brink with food. Rob grinned and many around them shouted their support. This solved the situation of King's Landing for a while, weakened the Reach in the long term and helped prepare for any upcoming campaigns they would launch in the Westerlands. Spoken of taking the initiative. Not a bad idea, if I'm honest. Maybe we could do something similar on our way back. Rob remarked, as he looked to his surrounding lords. Many of them grinning at the idea of easy loot and food to feed and pay their people and troops. Lastly, it seems the fourth batch of food has arrived in Moat Cailin. 100 tons of grains and oats and the salted carcasses of 500 cattle and 200 sheep. The shipment will be distributed through parts of the lands of Houses Stark, Sewin, Dustin, Roswell and Tall Heart with emphasis on Wintertown and Barrowton. The first food shipments from Bravos are also arriving in White Harbor and will soon augment the stocks of houses Mondale, Lock, Flint, Woolfield and Hornwood. This news was met cheers from many of the northern lords. Future shipments by cart are being planned towards Deepwood Mott, Last Hearth. The mountain clans and shipments will continue on the east coast from White Harbor to Skagos. Later on, even more will be distributed all around the north. He finally looked over towards Domeric. Your lands will be supplied on our way back once Ramsay Snow is dealt with. You will get extra supplies then. We can't risk strengthening his position. The young Lord Bolton simply nodded. Where do you get all of that food? A Valorlord asked. The first shipments came from the stocks of houses Free and their vassals. It seems that late Lord Walder was as greedy when it came to food as he was about anything else. Their stocks could supply their lands for many more winters. Everything deemed unnecessary for now has been siphoned off by Lord Cleesewin and sent north to help our people from starvation. Other caravans now will come from loot from the Westerlands and others. Stocks in the Riverlands are being replenished with them as we speak. Ships will also come from Bravos for the duration of the winter, as a trade agreement with them has been struck before. This led to a lot of murmurs between the Vale and Storm Lords, as they realized how Rob was making his kingdoms profit from the war and how he was already rebuilding while still in the Stormlands. None of the Northerners or Riverlanders cared for their small outbursts, as they proudly looked upon their monarch. Even the former Crown Lords looked happy. With the situation in King's Landing under control, the strains put on their own stocks would probably lessen considerably. A new era of prosperity is near, my lords. Soon, we will all get to enjoy the only real benefit of war, the peace that comes after it. Chapter 62, The Emergence of Kings. 301 AC. Rob. He curiously looked around at the remnants of the city from the top of his white destrier. They had just entered King's Landing from the Mudgate. Most of his army would camp outside the city on the former Tony grounds. He himself entered the city with 300 soldiers and a lot of his highest-ranking nobles. He rode at the front of their column, after Uncle Brynden and most of his scouts had long entered the city and announced their imminent arrival. At the front with him rode John, Domeric, Smalljan, Sir Donal and To. Other high-ranking nobles were right behind him or were setting up camp. All the Vale troops had directly gone to set up camp too, as there was nothing in the city for them. Two prominent vassals were still absent, Great Jon and Sir Willis. Both had been given command over 600 horsemen and they were currently plundering everything between Grassy Vale and Tumbleton. They had received simple orders. They were to avoid any confrontation with any substantial force. They were to pillage as much as possible and bring home all the food and livestock they could get their hands on. Lastly, they were to avoid any keeps in doing so. Small holdfasts of knightly houses could be taken if they deemed it possible, but no sieges or costly attacks could take place. Their main focus was to bring back food for the army and local population of the area, but it had many other benefits as well. It would show Willers Tyrell that they were a power that could not be ignored. It weakened the Reach as a whole, as it was one of the areas that were touched the least by their civil war. By stealing their provisions here, it would be harder to rebuild or supply armies in the Reach. It weakened the Reach on their border with the Stormlands as well, which made an invasion or even successful border skirmishes less likely. The Rosa Road also ran through the area, so if they wanted to attack him at King's Landing their supply lines, without any of the stocks of THA area left, would be stretched much further back. The Stormlanders had been so fond of the idea that they had dispatched 3 groups of 400 riders each to do the same in the area between the Cockleswent and the Blueburn rivers. The weaker the Reach became the better. Lord Morrigan had also told him it served to get some of the more hot-blooded lords to let off some steam. Some wouldn't return and others would be satisfied with some more plunder and action. In the long term, it would help stabilize the region and keep the lords happy. The raiding had been a great idea and the man responsible for it found himself in front of him, as they reached the top of Wisnia's Hill. Lord Deddings had taken the ruins as his headquarters in the city, as Egon's Hill was blown up and the dragon pit on the Hill of Roenis was being deconstructed. He jumped off his horse and the lord and all other nobles behind him went to one knee. "Your Grace, it is good to see you," the River Lord called out. "It is equally good to see you, my lord." Please everyone, stand up. He laughed and walked over towards them. He greeted the other nobles that were standing in behind before walking inside with Deddings. He gave him a detailed report on everything that had happened in the last couple of months, as well as the amount of food and supplies they had stolen from the Reach. In the end he could do nothing more than sincerely thank and congratulate the man. He would be very richly rewarded. He would make sure of that. Together they walked into the ruins of the September of Baylor. The remaining relics and valuables had been gathered and were safely locked away. What was left of the building had gotten a makeshift wooden roof and was now used as a command center. They sat down at a simple hardwood table. In the next half an hour, he told the Riverlord everything that had happened in the Stormlands. He was saddened by the demise of some of War companions but congratulated him on their victories. There have also been other developments in the city, Your Grace. The most notable one was found deep under the ruins of the Dragon Pit. The workers tried to take the foundations down, and after taking down a substantial part, a lot of old rubble was discovered deep in the ground. It is believed it was rubble from when the Dragon Pit collapsed during the Dance of Dragons. In the days after, most of it was cleared and a sword was found. One made of Valyrian steel. He looked up. The only Valyrian steel sword that had been lost during that time was that of House Royce. Finding that would do them a world of good with the veil. His assumptions were soon confirmed. We believe the sword to be Lamentation, the sword of House Royce. Its scabbard is lost and the pommel and crossguard are destroyed, but the blade itself is intact. He laughed at his vassal. If you are willing, I propose we gift it to Sir Ander together tonight at the feast. I think he will appreciate it. The Riverlord was taken aback by the fact he would be included but grinned all the same. I believe he will. They talked some more about the state of the city and its inhabitants. The worst excesses had been mitigated. Food supply had been restored and this had helped many people heal from sicknesses ramping through its population. Yet, some 4,000 had died before that and many were still weak. Just under 110,000 people remained, but they couldn't all stay here. He had thought long and hard on what to do with King's Landing. He had decided that he wanted it to be a small, but strong border city. Preferably some 30 to 35,000 people in size. That meant that 2/3 of the current population still needed to go. Before he had left, he had gotten the agreement from House Baratheon to send 15,000 people to their Storm Kingdom, which they would spread around and use to replenish losses in small towns all over its territory. He told his vassal as much and they discussed how this could practically be achieved. Lord Deddings had also tried to identify the orphans in the city. The result was that he guessed around 3,000 more were scattered around the ruins. During the ride here, Houses Mormont, Flint of Flint's Finger, Carstark and Bolton had showed interest in the orphan solution. He would discuss with them the possibility to send some 200 orphans each their way and to build accommodations for them. Others would go to Wintertown or Barrowton. He would speak to Sir Marlon Mandaily to start organizing their transport. Another idea of him was much more substantial. He would make the Night's Watch an offer. He would offer to buy the new gift from them for a substantial amount, and as an extra on top he would offer to build and organize 2 giant orphanages in one of the villages along the King's Road. One for those of noble birth and one for the common folk. He would pay the costs to run them for a single decade, after which it would fall to the Black Brothers. In turn, they could provide a constant influx of brothers to the order. Brothers that they can raise themselves to fill the needs of their organization. It would also give a very convenient solution for the young sons of bandits or traitors or even the bastard sons of his own nobles. Another 30,000 civilians would be taken with him deeper into the Riverlands. He would spread them around his lords so they could repopulate their villages and petty towns, without creating dissent anywhere, as they would only arrive in small groups. That left around 65,000 inhabitants, still more than double the amount he wanted there to be. However, he would look into that more when he was settled in Riverrun. For now, he would just need to organize where that smaller town would exist. He wanted to incorporate a lot of the houses still standing in the new town and parts of the walls as well. Other parts of the city would need to get torn down and the walls with them. However, this work would take years, more than planning couldn't be done for now. Most would have to wait until spring. The only benefit would be that they could use the stone from the wall to build a new fortress to oversee the mouth of the Black Water. 1 month later. They had been in Riverrun for 3 days now. Parts of his forces had been dispersed along the way. All Riverlanders had gone to their homes, a lot of them with groups of a few dozen or a few hundred small folk in tow. He had asked all of them to send a report back on the state of their keeps, as many had been damaged by the Lannisters. The Crownlanders and the Clawmen had also dispersed, but they would also be the first ones to come back. He still needed his forces, as another campaign to the Westerlands would soon have to be undertaken. For now, he was trying to put the Riverlands in order and to ensure the supply lines for the army when it finally left. This morning he had beheaded the last of the male free prisoners and their allies. Only 3 had preferred death, the others were sent on their way towards the wall. He had also spent most of last day debating on what they wanted to do with the Lannisters and the Westerlands. He had talked with his advisors and vassals, but also with some of the lords of the West themselves. Yet, the implementation of their plan had had to wait as other more urgent news had come in. While he and his advisors had been debating the Westerlands, the lords of the Vale had debated their own fate. Lord Harold had followed him to Riverrun with most of his forces, letting only the wounded and those that had lost too much already go home under the leadership of Lord Redfort. Yesterday evening, Harold Arryn had been proclaimed King of the Mountain and the Vale by his vassals in the camp outside of the castle. The Vale had officially announced their independence, and because of that he was now waiting on the newly proclaimed king to iron out an alliance between their 2 kingdoms. Unlike some of his vassals, he thought them proclaiming their independence was a good thing. The only problems were the future defense of the eastern portion of the Riverlands and trade. Things he wanted to get sorted out now. Not much later, the new king arrived. Together they got to work. Most of the clauses were pretty standard. The Vale had to recognize the dissolution of the Iron Throne in perpetuity, and they had to mutually recognize each other's kingdoms. The Vale would also need to recognize the Storm Kingdom and the new Westerlands Kingdom, on the condition they do the same to him. The only difficult part about this was the Westerlands, but after he explained his plan with it, Harold agreed. They officially agreed upon a defensive alliance between their kingdoms. In case any of their lands would be attacked, be it by the Tyrells, Lannisters, Isozi or others, then the other was honor bound to come to their aid. To strengthen this, they talked about marriages between their kingdom. The only problem was that Harold was already married and he had no siblings to marry off either. To accommodate this, they promised to discuss marriages between their future offspring or that of House Royce. Marriages between other houses were also considered, especially houses Mondaly, Flint of Widowswatch and Locke. These 3 houses had helped in the civil war in the Vale and were strategically closest to them. The only real unwed possibilities were Sir Robin Flint, heir to his house, and Sir Roderick Locke, nephew to Lord Maladhaw. Maybe one of Lord Wyman's granddaughters could also be considered, but that still had to be seen. They promised each other to encourage their vassals and look into it more in time. These 3 houses would also be rewarded by House Arryn. As a gesture for helping them defeat House Sunderland and helping on the fingers and with the fighting against houses Linderley and Corbray. An agreement was reached that all merchants of their respective kingdoms would have the same tax rates they had had to pay under the Iron Throne for the next 50 years. The only exception were the merchants of these 3 houses, whose tax rates in the Vale would be lowered by half for the next 25 years. This would lead to growth in trade between their kingdoms. It would also give these 3 houses a de facto monopoly on trade with the Vale, as others wouldn't be able to easily match their prices with the extra taxes. It would serve as his own reward to those houses, as all 3 had loyally followed him for 2 years and done everything he had asked for them. They had even invaded the Vale together on his orders. The borders between their kingdoms were also officially set as the borders of the Vale before the start of the war. Designated fishing and shipping areas were decided upon. All negotiations went easily, as it was all standard stuff. They also started negotiations about lumber, wool and pelts sales to the Vale for this winter, while they would look to sell food to the Riverlands and the North if the losses during the Civil War would permit it. Wickenden, Solpants, Maidenpool, Gulltown and Duskendale would also be encouraged to form a trading network together, with the latter 2 serving as a gateway to big Isozi trade. Driftmark, Dragonstone and what was left of King's Landing could possibly join it as well. Lastly, they debated debts and incomes. King Harold reaffirmed his promise to pay a ninth of the debt to Bravos, totaling at 136,000 golden dragons. The Vale was again promised a third of war indemnity paid by the Martells as well as a big share from the campaign in the Westerlands, which they planned to join. Their share would be relative to the amount of troops they delivered, as well as the amount of heavy lifting they would do. Satisfied, they toasted on their cooperation with a great bottle of arbor red, courtesy of the great Jon who had stolen it from some knightly holdfast a few leagues south of Tumbleton. With the most perfect timing he had ever seen, Maester Vimmen then entered the solar. "A letter has arrived for you, your grace. It bears the sigil of House Martell." He simply raised his eyebrow at the letter and reached for it, after putting his wine glass on the table. He opened the letter, which was addressed to him and him alone. A dirty old trick to try to play him and his allies apart, not that it would work. To Robb Stark, King in the North and of the Trident. I have received your offer for peace and share the sentiment that enough bloodshed has already been spilled between our peoples. I too wish for this conflict to end. However, I cannot agree to the terms you laid out to me. As such, here you can find the terms of my counteroffer. As asked, we will recognize the independent kingdoms of the North and the Riverlands, the Vale and the Stormlands and their borders and the abolishment of the Iron Throne, if they all in turn recognize Dorne, with its current borders, as independent with the head of House Martell as its monarch. I will accept your proposal to ransom our soldiers at 1 silver stag per soldier. The 8,433 silverlings will be on their way from the moment an agreement is reached. They will be transported to a site of your choosing. In turn, I ask that my men are either to be transported towards the Boneway or by ship to Sunspear. You will promise to turn over the bones of Gregor Clegane and Armory Lork, as you suggested, but you will also do the same for my brother and every Dornish soldier that lost his lives, highborn or lowborn. Dorne agrees to pay its share of the Iron Bank debt, to keep our good relations with the trading city. On the condition a banker from the city comes to us to hammer out the details, we will pay off the requested 136,000 dragons. Dorne also agrees to pay a war indemnity for its share in the destruction of the Stormlands, but only of 200,000 golden dragons. They will be paid off in installments within a total of 5 years. During the first month of each year 40,000 golden dragons will be delivered to you how you see fit. Ransom offers will be made by the individual houses. In the case of my daughter and niece I offer you a total sum of 10,000 golden dragons for the both of them. As a token of my sincerity, I'm willing to hand Myrcella Baratheon over to your care once the deal has been finalized. If you accept, a diplomat and guard will be sent to free my daughter and guide her in negotiating a trade deal with your kingdom and those of your allies. With the highest esteem. Doran Martell, Lord of Sunspear and Prince of an independent Dorne. He read the letter quickly, before he gave it to King Harold. The Valyman read over it as well and looked up at him. What other things he changed from the proposal? 200,000 instead of 300,000 dragons for the war indemnity. What else? He looked over the letter once more and thought about it. He wants all Dornish bones delivered. Technically possible, but that will take some work. He also rejects our demand to give lands to the Lords of the Marches. He wants the integrity of Dorne recognized. Instead he offers us Myrcella Waters. Removing the last claimant might be a good idea. If we accept, that might be a difficult pill to swallow for some of the Stormlords there. Harold remarked. You're right. However, it might be too good to let it pass. Peace and trade would be most welcome for all of us. A third of 200,000 is not a lot for a war, but Dorne is poor and we need peace anyway. Better to have something instead of nothing. They were never our primary enemy. He responded. Yes, and the ransoms for the nobles will make good on the lower indemnity for most of our lords. Exactly. Besides, if we haggle the princess enough, we can partly make up for it with that trade agreement he wants. He'll probably want to sign and ratify it as soon as possible. He will want it to help gather the funds to pay us the next 5 years. So, we accept the proposal. The King of the Mountain and the Vale asked him. I would. The only problem is how the Baratheons will react. They get less coin, no borderlands and will have to organize transports with the bones of the Dornishmen. Can't we sweeten the deal by sharing in the costs of the transport and put Lord Davos under pressure to accept the rest? Harold questioned. Not a bad idea. Will you write up the letter? I'll look it over tomorrow morning. I will. Now I guess it's time to finally deal with the Westerlands. It's time. Would you like to accompany me? The Valiman nodded and they left the solar. He asked one of his guardsmen to order John and Harry on to organize the prisoners. Afterwards, they walked to the second floor to a room with 2 guardsmen in front of it. Both men saluted him and let him go inside. "Young Willem Lannister, it is time we have a chat," he called out to the 14-year-old boy in front of him. Next to him sat his twin brother Martin. Both hadn't lacked for anything during their captivity and he had allowed them each other's company as well. Both boys quickly acknowledged his presence. "Welcome, King Robb. What do you want to talk about?" Willem asked. "Who is your companion?" his brother Martin asked. "My name is Harold Arryn, Lord of the Eyrie and King of the Mountain and the Vale. Pleased to make your acquaintance," Harold smoothly replied. This immediately took the boys by surprise, which was always a good thing. The Vale has recently declared its independence. The Stormlands and Dawn have done the same thing. The Iron Throne is done for, now we must decide what to do with the Westerlands. For that, your presence is needed," he added. "Our presence? What can we possibly say or do that makes our presence worthwhile? I have been your prisoner for almost 2 years, my brother only a few months less than that. We barely know what's going on in the outside world. What do you need us for?" Willem demanded to know. "Well, to put it in simple terms, you are Tywin Lannister's only clear heirs. That's why we need you," he responded. Both boys' mouths fell open. "We are what?" Martin asked. He rolled his eyes at the theatrics. "All 3 of your cousins are dead. Joffrey is dead, Tommen is our captive and Myrcella is off in Dawn somewhere and will soon be delivered to us. However, the latter doesn't even matter as they are all bastard-born. This makes it so that Tywin's legitimate line is extinct. The next legitimate line to descend from Tytos Lannister is your father's. However, after his death and the death of your older brother, only you 2 remain together with your little sister. If something were to happen to Tywin, Willem would succeed him and Martin you would become heir. That's why we need your presence now." "Our presence where?" Willem asked, trying to shield his younger brother. "Many of the Westerlands nobles have been taken prisoner over the duration of the war. We have gathered them all here at Riverrun to decide the fate of the country and House Lannister. So, unless you want us to decide the fate of your entire house, including your own, without anyone from House Lannister present, you should follow us now," he replied, his patience running thin. Both boys looked at each other. "We'll follow you." "Very well, thank you," he replied, as he turned around and walked out of the door with Harold. The 2 boys followed behind them. After them, the 2 guards joined them to make sure they didn't try anything stupid. When they arrived at the Great Hall of Riverrun, it was filled to the brim with prisoners from the west. It was lined along the walls with guards from houses Tully and Stark. One useful guardsman handed him a list of everybody who was in the room. He glossed over the names. In the hall were representatives, most of the times the Lord or Heir, from houses Banefort, Istron, Westerling, Brax, Greenfield, Cricker Hall, Jast, Vicary, Marbrand, Sarsfield, Stackspear, Lefford, Kenning, Serret, Broom, Harmel, Leiden, Payne, Clifton, Betterley, Heatherspoon, Foot, Fairn, Turnberry and Algood. They had had even more prisoners, but most were from insignificant knightly houses and weren't invited to the meeting. The Westerlords were loudly talking amongst each other, but all quieted down when they saw him enter with Sir Kevan's sons. Jon quickly walked to his side. "Quite a gathering, eh?" he laughed. He simply nodded. This will do nicely." He had already talked with many of the more important lords and heirs here. He had had talks with Sir Adam Marbrand, heir to Ashmark, whose father had been allowed back to the Westerlands to wage war against his cousin Tywin. Others that had been allowed back had been the heirs of houses Brax, Jast, Westerling and an uncle of Lord Sarsfield and a younger son to Lord Cricker Hall. Together they had been organizing resistance to Tywin for months now. In the last few days, he had also talked with Lords Cricker Hall, Sarsfield, Serret, Brax and Westerling one-to-one. Lastly, he had discussed things with Lady Lefford. He had talked about their vision for their homeland and what he demanded from a peace deal. Out of all that he had now prepared his proposal. It was time they got serious and ended the old lion's power forever. Good, well, I think you all know who I am. He started, to the soft laughter of many of his friends and soldiers. Next to me is Harold Arryn, King of the Mountain and the Vale, and I think you all know who the boys are. So, I think we can commence our talks. Has the Vale also declared its independence? Lord Reginaldistron shouted, voicing what many of the Westerlords were asking themselves. Yes, we have. As has the Stormlands, and Dawn is in the process of doing the same. The Iron Throne and the Seven Kingdoms are no more. Now it has become time to decide what you want for the Westerlands. King Harold replied. What we want? What you want, you mean? You have us all in captivity, have ravaged a third of the country and have put some of us in open rebellion against our liege lord. You don't care about what we want. Sir John Betterley screamed. Some murmured in agreement, while others hissed at him to shut up. On the contrary, Sir Betterley. He responded. The knight was quickly taken aback by the use of his name. He had probably hoped to scream something in relative anonymity. What I want is peace and stability in Westeros for the next 30 years. Yes, I could invade your homeland, sack your keeps one by one and take off with all your plunder and livestock. It would benefit me greatly for a while, but after that I would have a cumbersome neighbor with constant rebellions, uprisings and wars that would spill over my borders. I want peace and stability, which means I will take into account what the local nobility wants. This led to a lot of murmuring in the hall. He let them be for a while, before speaking up again. There are a few avenues that can be taken from here. What is non-negotiable is the fact that the Westerlands will become independent. To do so and not descend into chaos, you will need a monarch. A monarch. Someone screamed. You want to crown Tywin? Another yelled. No. That is another thing that is non-negotiable. Tywin Lannister dies. He reacted quickly. This led to more murmurs. Who then? Lord Harmel asked loudly. Tywin's legitimate heir. He responded matter-of-factly. You want to put Tommen on the throne of Casterly Rock? Sir Cedric Payne asked in shock. I said legitimate heir. Tommen Waters is nothing more than a bastard born from incest. He will not rule anything ever again, nor will his sister. Tywin's heirs are standing next to me. Except for him, they are the last legitimate male line heirs of Tytos Lannister. He answered, waving towards the two blonde boys. You want to crown them? While Tywin is still alive? He'll just kill them both. Lord Morland jumped up. He won't have the opportunity. Not with my army to protect them. If you agree to it, I will help you install them on the throne and defeat Tywin. What would you get out of all that? Sir Gareth Clifton asked. The long-term peace and stability I desire. I will also get guarantees that a peace agreement we will make will be followed. He answered seriously. A peace agreement? You mean some forced deal heavily in your favor? Sir John Betterley spat out. Look around you, sir. The whole nobility of your kingdom is in captivity. Your lands are in turmoil and relatively undefensed. 3 of your armies have been smashed to pieces by the Starks. Tywin's children are all dead. King's Landing is lost. Tywin barely controls a third of the Westerlands, while all the rest of Westeros is lost. The Vale stands with the North and the Riverlands, and we can attack your homeland at a moment's notice. Of course, the peace deal won't be to your benefit. You lost the damn war. King Robb should ask for your unconditional surrender and claim the scalp of every Lannister alive for what they did to his father, or I for my brother-in-law Sir Robar Royce. We offer you a way out with dignity. A way to keep your lands and to go home to your families. A way to build a future. If you want to follow Tywin to the end, then that is noble of you and I respect it, but it will only lead to an early grave. King Harold spoke up. All of that for a lord who abandoned all of you at the God's Eye. Tywin left you all to die. He left his own brother to die for him so he could escape. He would turn his coat on any of you without a thought if it would benefit his precious legacy. Jon added. This led to a lot of murmurs. From his side Willem Lannister suddenly spoke up. Is it true? Did Uncle Tywine leave my father to die? He turned around to answer, but Willem screamed. No, I don't want to hear it from you or your vassals. I want to hear it from them. The boy walked over to Lord Seret, who had been a known battle companion of his father. Is it true? The older lord shot his eyes down to the ground and stumbled over his words. Young Willem, it's not that easy, it's... Is it true, Lord Seret? Martin Lannister also implored, coming to stand next to his twin brother. Yes, it is. Lord Tywine abandoned us all at the God's Eye. Your father kept on fighting, never losing trust in his brother, but he died in the end. We only surrendered after he had fallen. He could see the anger and hurt in the faces of both boys. What would you have us do? Willem Lannister asked meekly. I would have you contest your uncle for the domination of the Westerlands. I would have you take up the leadership of House Lannister and the crown of the Westerlands that your family lost to the Targaryens 300 years ago. You will guarantee both your safety and your house's survival in doing so. He responded. And if we refuse? Martin Lannister spoke up. Then you will both be sent to the wall and we will find another to do so. If we don't find anyone, the Westerlands will be plunged into chaos for decades. He answered matter-of-factly. It had no use lying to any of them. They should know what they were getting into and what was on the line. Both boys looked at him in shock, as did many of the Westerlords. You would send them to the wall. They are only 14 years old and innocent of Tywine's crimes. Lord Alyn Stackspear called out. Aye, they are, but this is war. They would be rival claimants to the new ruler of the Westerlands and would need to be removed. You are all intelligent enough to understand that. I will not kill them, so the wall is the only solution. There they may live out their lives, they could even gain fame and standing there. He shrugged. He would not lose sleep over sending Lannisters to the wall. The whole family was responsible for the death of his father-in-law, his brother-in-law and many more loyal friends, vassals and subjects. His offer was generous, if they refused it then that was their problem. Most lords grumbled, but they understood. So, it's either a crown and fighting against Lord Tywine or the wall. Willem Lannister asked. Aye, that is your choice. The older brother looked to his younger twin. I cannot condemn my brother to the wall. I will do it, but I don't know how. I will need help. A council will be appointed from the lords here present. A regent will also be chosen for you until you come of age. Your countrymen will help guide you and my lords and generals will help you win against Tywine. The elder boy nodded in agreement. You will allow us to make up that council? Lord Titosbrum asked. I will. I will choose its members and make sure it functions, but it will consist solely of nobles from the Westerlands. I do not wish to annex you, directly or indirectly. You will decide your own internal affairs. This reply seemed to be appreciated by the majority of the lords present. Who will it consist of? Sir Cedric Payne asked suspiciously. For now, I was thinking Lords Crickehall, Seret, Brax and Susfield, as well as Sir Adam Marbrand and Sir Folly Prester, once he joins you. A seventh position will remain open for the boy's grandfather Sir Hayes Swift, if he is willing to abandon Tywine. I thought you would appreciate the symbolism of 7 council members. He explained. He had chosen the names with care. They came from all over the Westerlands and consisted of some of the most important houses of the kingdom. No one would be able to stand against them if they backed this plan. His considerations hadn't been fruitless, as many seemed to be considering the option. House Crickehall accepts. Lord Roland finally shouted above all others. He had known he would accept of course, as he had already discussed this with him. The same went for Lord Seret, Brax and Susfield, as well as Sir Adam Marbrand. All voiced their support one by one. This seemed to sway many of their countrymen, as most others in the room relented. Who would be the regent? Lord Lewis Leiden asked. House Leiden was a powerful house and they controlled the Gold Road from their fortress at Deep Den. It was very important that they join them. However, they were also fiercely loyal to Casterly Rock. For that reason alone, he hadn't included them. Lord Goran Westerling, on the condition Willem Lannister agrees to marry his daughter. He will only be the regent until Willem comes of age in 1.5 years. This caused much more controversy. Lord Goran wasn't a powerful lord. His house had lost a lot from his invasion and his daughter was of questionable stock, as their mother had come from a house originally from the merchant classes. This too was no coincidence. It would deprive Willem from the support of stronger houses when trying to rebuild his kingdom. It might also alienate his children from some of their vassals due to the blood of their mother. He wanted the Westerlands to be stable, not for them to become strong again. Besides, Lord Goran wasn't incapable, but he wasn't a great light either. He would do a decent, but not an excellent job. This was exactly what he wanted. The man had also warmed up to him. After the betrayal of his wife and brother-in-law, he could have ended his house and children, but he hadn't. He had even allowed his eldest son to return to the crag and take command of it before leaving for the Stormlands. They had had a few talks since then and the Lord seemed thankful for all of this. He also seemed disillusioned with Tywin. The fact that the man had schemed with his former wife and had risked his entire family had greatly angered Lord Westerling. The fact both had wanted his daughter to disgrace herself had had him fuming. This all served his purpose. If he wasn't careful, Willem could rebuild the Westerlands to its pre-war strength in less than 2 decades. He would have huge wealth at his disposal through his mines, and the existence of Lannisport could bring in goods, manpower and trade relations as well. Especially now that Old Town was damaged and House Redwine's ports sacked. He didn't want House Lannister to invade the Riverlands again for revenge anytime soon, and so a delicate balance would need to be constructed. Strong enough to keep it together and oppose Tywin in the beginning, but not strong enough to achieve the full potential the region had to offer in the long term. Lord Goran would do exactly that. I would have to marry Jane. The oldest Lannister asked. It would be one of the conditions. He nodded. Both boys shared a look, but in the end they relented. She was a pretty girl, he could do worse. What would be the other conditions? They asked him. This seemed to silence the room, as many wanted to know. He signaled for a servant to bring a document. This is a draft for a peace agreement between Houses Stark, Tully, Arryn and Baratheon on the one side and House Lannister on the other side. If you sign this, we will get you your throne and homeland. We will make sure your family, including your mother and little sister, will be safe and that both our lands will be rid of any form of aggression from the other. All lords peeked forward, trying to catch a glimpse of its content. Of course, some already knew parts of it. All future council members and the future regent had heard parts of the agreement during the past days. He had used their reactions to measure the feasibility of his demands. He would now use this to his advantage. He sat down at the head of a table at the foot of the seat of the Lord of Riverrun. Jon, both his uncles and Lords Karstark, Mallister, Bracken and Bolton took place. To his right, in the place of honor, King Harold sat down. I would invite all of the appointed council members and the regent to take a seat together with both Willem and Martin Lannister to complete negotiations of the treaty. I will do this in the presence of all of you, to show you my goodwill and the fact I do not secretly wish to take control of your homeland. And if we refuse to acknowledge the peace treaty? Sir Philip Foote asked. Then you will have a chance to send over warmer clothing from your seat to keep you warm at the wall. It's a courtesy Tywin wouldn't have given me or any of my lords. He responded in an icy tone. That shut most of them up. They had to understand that what he was doing here was a very generous offer. If rejected, their fates would be dire. All 6 of the nobles he had appointed walked over and took a seat at the table. He had wine, bread and salt brought over as signs of goodwill before the negotiations. He took the document in his hands and looked it over as he began to explain his demands. First of all, you will recognize the independence of Kingdom of the North and the Trident, the Kingdom of the Mountain and the Vale and the Storm Kingdom. You will also recognize Houses Stark, Arryn and Baratheon as their respective rulers. All lords simply nodded. You will recognize the dissolvement of the Iron Throne in perpetuity. All agreed once more. 1 or 2 curses could be heard from inside the group of nobles in front of him, but they were quickly silenced. Willem Lannister will agree to marry Jane Westerling 1 week after the recapture of Casterly Rock. His future father-in-law Lord Goran will serve as a regent, while houses Croquet Hall, Marbrand, Serret, Brax, Prester, Sarsfield and Swyft will make up a council of 7 to aid them in rebuilding the Westerlands. If Sir Hayes Swift rejects the offer, the present council members may choose another member from among their peers themselves. All lords at the table eagerly agreed. They saw their power rise in the new kingdom before it had even been founded. This led to grumbling from some of the other powerful houses like Leiden, Bainfort and Payne, but nothing major. House Lannister and the Westerlands will accept the fate of House Frey. All members will be sent to the Wall or the September. This includes the progeny of Lady Jennifer, your aunt. Her underage sons and grandsons will be raised in Winterfell until they are old enough to join the Night's Watch. Her son Sir Lionel will be sent there immediately after his capture. He said to the 2 Lannister boys. Now, the lords quickly came into action and agreed. Understandably so, if you thought about it. After deposing Tywin, Jenna would be out for blood. Taking away her power and family would ensure no retaliation could be made. To his surprise, both boys didn't seem to care too much for their free cousins. Yet, it made the decision a lot easier. The Westerlands will agree to pay 1/9 of the current debt Westeros owes to the Iron Bank. As one of the 9 constituent regions of the continent, we ask that you pay off your share. This surprised many of them. Most probably thought he would dump the whole debt of them, while others had forgotten about it altogether. How much is 1/9 of this debt? Lord Croquet asked. This totals at just over 136,000 golden dragons. He replied. This is all you ask us to repay from foreign debt? Lord Jason Sarsfield asked. Aye, it is. All men quickly agreed, thinking they had come off very easily. To be fair, they had. However, they only had because other demands would be much more controversial. They would soon realize this. House Lannister agrees to waive all of its current debts to the Iron Throne as it doesn't exist anymore. No houses will ever be held accountable for it. He continued. Now the lords looked more uneasy, as all knew this sum exceeded 3 million golden dragons. In the end, they all agreed as they knew they could not demand any of it back. This would greatly weaken House Lannister, as it would take many decades before they could rebuild such reserves through their mines. House Lannister agrees to pay a total war indemnity of 1,200,000 golden dragons to Houses Stark and Arryn over the course of 10 years. This is to repay the damages they have done with their invasion of the Riverlands and their supported invasion of the Vale. At the start of every year 120,000 golden dragons will be delivered to Riverrun. He read aloud. Only 150,000 would go to the Valyman, he would receive the rest as they had suffered much more because of them. This shocked all of them. First of all, it was unclear if House Lannister even had such sums available after the war and forgiving their debts to the Iron Throne. Second of all, it was a real fortune and it would slow down rebuilding the Westerlands considerably. This was exactly his intent. He wanted to slow down their development, as well as accelerate his own. The funds would be used to rebuild and repopulate the Riverlands, as well as strengthen and populate parts of the north. I'm unsure if we can agree to that, seeing how we don't know what the current earnings of House Lannister are. Lord Serret smartly tried to negotiate. However, he would have none of it. House Lannister has seen fit to lend over 3 million golden dragons to King's Landing in the last 15 years. During the same period, they managed to rebuild their fleet after the Greyjoy Rebellion and raise a force to aid King Robert in putting it down. After all that, they still had enough funds to raise 45,000 soldiers to invade the lands of the Riverlands. I think this sum will be entirely reasonable for Casterly Rock to procure yearly, as Lannisport and its trading fleet remain unharmed and all of its private mines untouched. If any complications arrive, you vassals could loan your monarch the expected amount. A lot of the lords seemed taken back by his hard-handed approach, but he could see their hesitation to say something about it. The nobles at the back did not have this problem though, and some of them started shouting against him. He simply raised his eyebrow. It looks like some houses are already fighting amongst themselves to loan you the money if you need it, Your Grace. He nonchalantly said to Willem Lannister. This seemed to silence some of those shouting, but also made the boy really uncomfortable. He looked left and right for the support of the council members. In the end, Lord Westerling agreed to it, but he asked if a possible extension would be allowed if the finances didn't add up. He looked over the new regent and agreed reluctantly. If you can prove there are legitimate problems to pay it in the agreed installments, you will be allowed to pay it off in 15 years instead of 10. This would lower the installments from 120,000 a year to 80,000 a year. This seemed to placate the council somewhat at least, and they moved on. The Westerlands will agree to hand over some of its borderlands. All along the border with the Riverlands, the border will move 10 miles to the west. The only exceptions will be strategic locations which will be agreed upon in negotiations with the local lords. This finally undid all cooperation from the Room, as he knew it would. If they agreed to this, many houses would lose lands. Houses Brax, Lefford, Payne chief among them, but many other smaller ones as well. Sir Cedric Payne could be heard shouting, and Lady Lefford, who had been mostly agreeable with his plans until now, seemed to look disapprovingly towards him. Lord Brax voiced the sentiment at the table. King Rob, with all due respect, but this would greatly weaken many houses present here, among them my own. I ask myself, for what? To prove us a lesson. These borders have been locked in for centuries. Changing that is controversial to say the least. You say you wish to avoid chaos and anarchy on our borders. You also say you don't want to rule us, but still you encroach on our lands. It makes one wonder your intentions. The Lord of Hornval addressed him. He looked over to him. Might I remind you, Lord Titos, that before the conquests these borders frequently moved a few miles this way or that way. These borders are coincidentally the ones that were in use when Loren Lannister gave up his crown, nothing more. I think your previous campaign has shown that the Riverlands are too easily invaded from your kingdom. By moving the border, you wouldn't be able to move so quickly towards our heartland. It has nothing to do with revenge. What will 10 miles make for difference in that manner? That is a purely symbolic measure. Lord Seret joined the conversation. Lord Titos Brax quickly agreed with him. It might be. Some of my vassals told me much the same thing. They proposed that I fully annex the Golden Tooth and maybe even the Hornval and all lands east of it to hold the mountains against any future invasions. I had previously rejected this proposal, because I did not want to create any revanchism in your kingdom. Yet, if you agree with my vassals that it isn't far going enough, then I will lay that idea on the table as well. He waved over to Lords Mallister, Bracken and Tully while saying so as to emphasize his point. All three nodded greedily at the proposal. You can't do that. You won't take my lands. The Hornval has been my family's home for thousands of years. Lord Brax sputtered out. My lord. I thought you agreed that 10 miles would be only symbolic. This is a clear and unsymbolic measure. He feigned ignorance. The lord in question seemed to completely shut down when he heard those words, and before he did something stupid, Lord Crickehole cut him off. King Stark, this last proposal would indeed create revanchism and endanger any lasting peace between our peoples. Because of that, I ask you to go back to the premise of your earlier proposal. Even so, I think 10 miles is rather harsh for some houses involved. He looked into the eyes of Lord Roland. This was a capable man. He was also feared on the battlefield. The reason he had pressed for Lord Westerling to be made regent was so lords like Crickehole wouldn't be given the position. What do you propose as an alternative then, Lord Roland? He retorted. The big-boned lord looked around him for support of his fellow lords. After receiving encouraging nods from Lords Westerling, Seret and Sarsfield, he spoke up. Maybe 5 miles would have the same effect. It would lengthen supply lines and put extra hours of marching between the border and the nearest keeps of the riverlords. It could also help increase the revenue of your border lords as to better protect their borders. He silently looked upon the strong, older lord. He had counted upon those 10 miles to make his defense, but was it really necessary? He pictured the map of the Westerlands in his mind's eye and ran over all the fields, creeks and hills he remembered. He had studied the map so frequently that he knew it like the back of his hand. The older lord seemed to have garnered support from many of his countrymen for the offer. By accident, he had now also supported the idea of changing the borders, just not by how much. He remembered important creeks, hills and villages who were a little more than 5 miles out on certain places, so he simply countered the offer. I can agree with your take that it would create revanchism, and I want our kingdoms to live in peace together. Yet, 5 miles is not enough. If you were to agree to 7 miles, then I would be able to adjust my proposal. Lord Crickehall looked around the table and the room for support. In the end Lord Brax seemed to give in, as did a few other border lords. He made a great show of changing 10 to 7 miles on the paper as to emphasize their will in these negotiations. In the end, it would matter little. Willem Lannister will personally rally the Westerlords against Lord Tywine in the upcoming campaign. He read aloud. He looked towards the boy, who quickly accepted. The Westerlands will ally with us against the Greyjoys in the future and will allow us use of their fleet when the opportunity presents itself. He continued. Before anyone could intervene, he explained himself. The Ironborn have crowned their own king again. You all know what happens when they do this. Only a decade ago, they burned your fleet in the harbor and sacked Fair Isle and other coastal areas. They will do so again if they are not stopped. History has shown us as much over the last 300 years. Here the group seemed mixed, but aid came from an unexpected source. Sir Gareth Clifton, brother-in-law to Lord Farman, loudly vocalized his support to bring down the Ironborn. Others, like Lord Bainfort, supported this idea too, as they feared even more damage to their lands in the future from the sea. In the end, the council agreed. The Westerlands will agree to a defensive alliance with the Kingdom of the North and the Trident, the Kingdom of the Mountain and the Vale and the Storm Kingdom in the case of an attack by the Reach. This will only count if the Reach is the attacker. In turn, we pledge to help if any aggression is made upon your lands from the Reach. Now the Westerlords under the leadership of Lord Crickehall quickly agreed. They all wanted peace, and war with the Reach would mean a catastrophe. They also knew that he could defeat the Reach, as he had done so twice before. Lastly, you agree to forbid the Faith Militant's existence in your kingdom as your first decree as king. He said to Sir Kevan's son, as he rolled up the paper. All lords simply shrugged and quickly accepted. None of the council members cared for the order, and all were eager to get rid of a possible opponent to their goals. All lords seemed glad that this seemed to be the end of his list of demands, but he decided to sneak in his last condition. To ensure your cooperation in all of this, your brother Martin will remain as a guest in Riverrun until you come of age. After that, he will be released and escorted back to Casterly Rock. Now he captured both boys' attention. You can't do this. Willem almost shouted. I need my brother. Lord Westerling quickly put a hand on the boy's shoulder. He wants to keep your brother to ensure you rally the Westerlords, hand over the lands and start paying the indemnity. After that the year will be almost up. He won't hurt him in any way or form. Sadly, it's a very standard practice. You can't allow him to stay in captivity here. Willem once again protested. He won't be, I promise. He will be free to roam the castle and get the best education possible, as long as you both promise that he won't ever try to leave before his time. His uncle Edmure spoke up. Willem seemed to hesitate, so his uncle continued. I would even be willing to foster another son of a Westerlord to make sure he feels more at home and is connected to his people. This son could come and go when he wants to. I would like that. Martin Lannister weakly responded. He then turned to his brother. It means that we will be safe, Willem. It means we can see mother, grandfather and Janey again. It won't be too long. We have been longer here already than the time still left before we come of age. The new king of the Westerlands looked up to him. Can he be visited? Can I or my mother or grandfather visit him in Riverrun? He looked into the young boy's eyes. It almost broke his heart to separate the twin brothers, but he had to for the safety of his people. He could at least give him this. You can visit. He can also get a companion like my uncle proposed, if that's what you want. You can decide with your vassals who will suit the role. The eldest boy looked at his younger brother. This is all. No more clauses or demands. None. Then we accept on the condition you help me win Casterly Rock and defeat my uncle. The young boy sighed. He formally stood up and clasped the boy's arm. Then we are in agreement, King Willem. The boy seemed surprised at the title, but he said nothing. He looked across the hall. Is there anyone who doesn't support this peace? The words hang in the air like an unvoiced threat and no one spoke out against the proposal. Good, then I suppose you all bow to your new monarch. Willem Lannister, King of the Rock. All nobles went to their knees. He looked over the spectacle. Now Westeros is at last completely broken up. Tywin's line and legacy have ended today in this very hall. Soon, no one would remember the old lion for anything else than his failures. Chapter 63, Rallying the West. 301 AC. Jon. He looked at the fields around him from on top his black destrier. They made quick progress along the Gold Road, only slowing down to attack more and more of the lands of the Reach in their way. The Gold Road ran through the northern parts of the Reach and he had gotten very clear orders from Robb. Everything to the south of the road was to be sacked at their leisure, while all keeps and holdfasts to the north were to be captured and garrisoned with as little damage as possible. For a while, he had doubted his orders, but it had come more and more clear as he snaked through the lands. Robb was planning to expand the riverlands up until the Gold Road. That's why he didn't want any damage done to these lands. At the same time, he still wanted the Reach damaged as much as possible and to get as much loot as they could take. That had to be achieved on the south side of the road. The latter was going exceedingly well. His troops were penetrating the North March up to 80 miles deep. They were sacking small holdfasts of knightly houses every single day and many more villages as well. It was true what they said about the Reach, they had a very large population and an abundance of knightly houses. Luckily, this also meant an abundance of loot. Robb had put him in charge of the army and he had first marched it to Stony September, after which it had snaked on the west side of the Blackwater until they reached the Gold Road. From there they followed Robb's orders, capture the north side and raid the south side. By now, most of their job in the Reach was done, as he could start to see the mountains of the Westerlands looming in the distance. Then the real campaign would start. He would march to Deep Den. It would open their gates and he would gather his forces there and rally the Westerlanders against Tywin. From there on, he would slowly march towards Casterly Rock, defeating any forces sent against him while linking up with more and more of the local rebels. He had been utterly surprised when Robb had called him into Riverrun Solar to tell him he would have to lead the campaign. Everyone had expected a last showdown between Robb and Tywin, but his brother had waved the thought away. Tywin is almost done and we greatly outnumber him. I can't afford to be stuck in month-long games of cat and mouse or sieges in the Westerlands. The Riverlands are in shambles, half of its keeps damaged, its food stores empty and almost half of its small folk killed or slowly starving. Victors will need to be rewarded, lands have to change hands and justice has to be spoken. King's Landing needs to be dealt with, as well as the successions of houses Hayford, Stokeworth and Rosby. Other houses will need to be eyed at too, not to speak of what to do with the traitors and their lands. I am needed here in the Riverlands, but I trust you to avenge father and finish the job, Jon. I know you can do it. He had doubted if the lords would want to follow him after his Targaryen displays in the Stormlands, but it hadn't been a problem. Mostly because many of those doubting him, especially those of the Stormlands and the Vale, weren't here. He had departed with 16,000 men. 5,000 northern veterans had followed him. Another 5,000 came from the Vale houses most sympathetic to them, under the command of Sir Andor Royce. Lord Harold had also gone back to the Vale to start ruling. Another 3,500 Riverlanders had joined them and when he captured land on the north side of the Gold Road they were ordered to garrison the places. Another 1,000 had joined from the former Crown lands on search for loot and plunder. Lastly, there were 1,500 Westerlanders. That last contingent existed of men they had held captive from several battles, as well as some volunteers that had ridden out to meet them. They had been placed under the command of their respective lords, under the oath or would pay their ransoms when the war was over. Of course, Robb had not been so stupid as to only allow an oath. They had all signed documents too. Breaking their promise would plummet any credibility the house had. The plan Robb had made was ingenious. It captured the lands from the Reach to use once negotiations with House Tyrell started. It also severely ravaged thousands of square miles of lands in the North March. This would further weaken the Reach and lengthen its process to recover but would also specifically weaken its border with the Riverlands, thereby protecting their border significantly. He had also tasked Jon with making sure that it was known the Westerlords had joined in the sacking and pillaging. This way, no friendship would easily be established between the Reach and Westerlands after the war. The raiding deep into Reach territory had already yielded many rewards. Over 10,000 livestock had been captured and sent north to Stony September. Parts of it would be slaughtered to feed the new population and help them settle in without starving, while the rest was to be handed out to new farmers to settle the deserted lands and quickly re-establish those areas. Hundreds of thousands of dragons worth of wines, tapestries, trinkets and other things had been captured and were constantly being sent north to Riverrun. Not to speak about the amount of armor, weapons and horses they had captured. He had sent some north, while other parts had been shared across the army. Yet, all that was just the prelude to his campaign in the Westerlands. Randil Tali and his forces had been called back to Highgarden to link up with the Tyrell forces there and help drive the Ironborn from their lands. This meant the whole north of the Reach was completely undefended. Its garrisons had been depleted by the Civil War and its population centers damaged. This left the rich fields, villages and towns of the North March ripe for the taking. It also helped satiate the army. Once they arrived in the Westerlands, the raiding would have to stop to not alienate their allies. Only specific lands of ardent Tywine loyalists could be damaged, but even then they would have to show restraint as Willem would want to distribute those semi-intact to loyal knights in his household. Under the impulse of Lord Roland Crickehall, Willem had started to create a household guard out of the former soldiers and knights of his father's retinue. All had been loyal to Sir Kevan and not Tywine, and it showed in their protection of his son. The relations between them and their allies were improving rapidly, as he started giving them enticing targets to raid and treated them like equals when holding council. Some of the Westerlords were slowly turning around when treating with him and the other lords of his brother's kingdom, while the Valiman and especially Sir Ander were quickly becoming friends. The Roycer had always supported Rob in father's memory, but after receiving back his family's ancestral Valyrian steel sword things had been different. The knight was openly seen drinking with the Great Jon or his sons. He trained his swordplay against Harry On or even Daisy and Lady Mage, and had asked for Lord Brynden Blackwood to accompany him in attacks. He had to admit Sir Ander was a good man, commander and fighter. He often brought his own targets to him to discuss and never failed to deliver. It was the first time since Oxcross the morale of an army had been so high. The lands around them were open for the taking, no enemy armies in a 300-mile radius, provisions and supply were outstanding. The only negative was the winter weather, but he had ensured ample tents, blankets and boots for the whole army. What also helped morale were the constant reports the Riverlanders got from their homes. Much of their forces had stayed home and were rebuilding their homes. Villages were slowly repopulated, food stores restocked and keeps repaired. Continuous strings of messages from all over telling about the slow replenishment of the lands helped to keep smiles on his men's faces. It also helped with cohesion, as Rob had ordered many contingents of northern soldiers to cut wood and help rebuild villages, towns and keeps all over the Riverlands. The help seemed to be appreciated and men from both regions were growing towards each other, highborn and lowborn alike. Other northern contingents were placed as large garrisons, helping to keep parts of the Riverlands free from brigands and riots. The largest were located at the Twins, King's Landing and of course beneath the walls of Riverrun. Osric Karstark also remained in command of the Golden Tooth. He would give it back to House Lefford after Tywine was defeated. Even so, Lady Lefford had been allowed back to her home to start preparing to take up the mantle as head of House Lefford and deal with her remaining rebellious cousins. He had also heard voices of Northmen wishing to stay in the south. Mostly low-born men with nothing real to come home to. Some older men or third or fourth sons that didn't wish to strain their family's food supply for winter if they would go back home. Even a handful of nephews and cousins from noble families had voiced the sentiment. Rob had been made aware of it and was probably planning something for it. After a while, he reached the camp his vanguard was setting up for the night. He entered the large command tent, his tent, and took immediate advantage of the bottle of Arbor Red stalled out on the table. He looked over a few documents a messenger brought him, before he called Lord Westerling and Sir Ander to him. Sir Ander was the undisputed commander of the Vale forces, while Lord Westerling was at least the nominal commander of those from the west. They went over the lands captured and garrisoned on the north side of the Gold Road and spoke of the progress the raiding was making. For now, only 8,000 men were in the actual camp, while almost as much were scattered around in raiding parties ranging from 300 to 1,000 men. They were penetrating deep into enemy territory and they had just received word that the Great Jon had captured another town of 3,000 inhabitants. He had sacked the town until nothing of value had been left, burned down the holdfast of the knightly house the town belonged to, and destroyed the wooden walls in certain areas to make its defences unusable in the future. Similar reports had been received over the last 10 days from the Carstark, Mormont, Marndaley, Blackwood, Mallister, Brune, Melcombe, Tollett and Wainwood contingents. Small towns, large villages, rich farmsteads, nothing was safe. It was agreed both Lord Goran and Sir Andor would take their respective contingents from the road on the morrow for a last attack south. In the meantime, he would march on 3 holdfasts to the north of the road. They would all meet back in 16 days where the Gold Road entered the western mountains. He wanted most of the army together when they marched towards Deep Den. From then on, playtime was over and the real work would begin. A month later. They had finally left the western mountains 4 days ago and were closing in on Lannisport. He had been surprised when he heard the news of how Tywin had divided his forces and holed himself up in Casterly Rock and Lannisport. In doing so, he avoided every possibility for a pitched battle and forced them into long sieges. To siege Casterly Rock was no small thing. The Lannister fortress had never fallen to an enemy army before in its thousands of years of existence. However, the closer he got the more he understood. All the lands they had passed through since leaving the mountains had been ravaged of everything needed to sustain an army. The food stores were empty, the wells were poisoned and the best towns to seek shelter in were put to the torch. All across the western plain tens of thousands of refugees scrambled for the resources he would need to gather to feed his ever-growing army. They had left with 16,000 men. Throughout their campaign in the Reach they had lost some 500 men, while another 1,000 were garrisoned in the conquered areas. Ever since they had reached Deep Den, more and more Westerlanders had joined their forces. Sometimes in small groups, other times by the hundreds. The Westerlander continent had grown to 3,500 men and they were still expecting troops from houses Crickehall, Kenning, Prester and Marbrand to join them in the next week or so. This would bring his forces close to 20,000 in number. If you took into account Tywin never managed to raise over 7,000 men since returning home, it was clear avoiding battle might be a smart move. His enemy's plan was clear. Hole up in Lannisport and Casterly Rock until we slowly starve in front of their walls and our alliance implodes on itself due to infighting fueled by the lack of resources. It wasn't a bad plan, but he had already tried to anticipate on it. He had sent word to Osric in the Golden Tooth to prepare for another supply chain to be organized from Riverrun directly to Casterly Rock. The garrisons in the conquered areas along the Gold Road were also tasked to bring some of the captured food supply towards Deep Den to follow him through the mountains. The local lords were also petitioned to prepare additional shipments for their forces. He didn't know if it would be enough, but it would help at the very least. Just before nightfall, they finally reached the ancient home of House Lannister. The fortress built into the lone enormous rock did indeed seem impregnable and Lannisport's walls in the distance seemed almost as imposing. When he got closer to the lion's mouth, it suddenly opened. He rode back in shock, shouting at his men to prepare for a possible sally out. Yet, only a lone rider appeared from the gates, which quickly shut behind him. The rider rode up to him and handed him a letter sealed in wax decorated by the sigil of the Lannister lion. He opened the letter quickly and read it in silence. To Rhaegar's bastard and my rebellious lords and nephews. I wish you good luck in trying to attack my seat. It has never fallen before, nor will it fall now. We readily await your arrival and look forward with glee on the prospect of littering our grounds with the bodies of rebels and savages. To any of my fellow countrymen, if any of you finally see the light and wish to rid yourself of the savages' presence, I will grant you full amnesty on the condition you attack the enemy and their food supplies for me. Tywin Lannister, Lord of Casterly Rock, Shield of Lannisport and Warden of the West. He annoyingly looked at the words. Even on the brink of destruction, the man still seemed to be arrogant to the bone. No matter, he would get his due sooner or later. He simply ripped the letter into 1,000 pieces and spit on it, in full view of the messenger. It was more of an answer the old lion ever deserved. After that, he let the rider go back to where he came from. It had no use for any of his allies to hear these words. Better to avoid any temptation at betrayal. As he helped his men to set up camp and organized their defensive plans in the event of a sally out, he saw how stupid it had been of him to think he could do that. In the span of 3 hours, 20 more of those letters were delivered to all parts of his army. It didn't take long for a few of them to fall into the hands of his allies, and word quickly spread around camp. Tywine would wait for everything to fall apart, while encouraging descent from his high and dry place in the rock. It might work, he realized when he finally fell down on his bed for the night. The next day he stood up and immediately called for a meeting with all lords and commanders. The current state of the Westerlands was assessed. The north of the Westerlands were still in complete disarray, even as houses Marbrand, Westerling, Sarsfield and Prester had done their best over the last few months to bring some sense of order to the place. The chaos had resulted in tens of thousands of refugees coming towards Lannisport. Apparently, Tywine had shut them all out to force him to choose between letting them die and risk alienating the Western lords, or to risk his supplies. The center of the Westerlands had been ravaged by Tywine himself, leaving nothing for him or his men. Only in the east and south, in the lands of houses Crickehall, Leiden, Serrit and Payne, supplies were available. Yet, the road wasn't safe, as Tywine still had many sympathizers among the knightly houses everywhere. Even more disturbingly, he had sent raiding parties to those lands while they were in the Reach and had weakened their ability to supply the army. It wouldn't be easy to take either Lannisport or Casterly Rock, but the former seemed the more plausible target for now. It was defended by its formidable city guard, as well as between 3,000 and 4,000 soldiers of the Lannister armies. Its gates would be reinforced, its stores overflowing and its towers filled to the brim with arrows and other projectiles to throw at them. Assaulting those mighty defenses might bring disaster for their army. For now, they could only start a siege. They were in the process of encircling the city, and tomorrow would begin with the construction of ladders, rams and siege towers. In truth, there was not much else to do. He would try to sneak messages into the city to encourage the troops present to betray Tywine, but success there was far from guaranteed. They discussed their supply lines and agreed to fortify certain strong points between Deep Den and the Golden Tooth and their camp to ensure the safe arrival of their supplies. They also looked on the map which houses were still openly following Tywine. In the next few days, squadrons would be sent out to deal with those holdfasts. None of Tywine's allies could be left alive to attack their supplies. Before dawn, a messenger had arrived with a small contingent of men from House Sarsfield. It brought news from Riverrun about the Reach. Robb had sent a letter accompanying it that it was important and should be discussed with the lords. He looked upon the letter and couldn't believe his eyes. The great clash between the Reach and the Ironborn had finally happened. He looked upon the faces of his brother's vassals and allies. It seems a great battle has taken place beneath the walls of Old Town. Euron Greyjoy apparently disembarked a force a few weeks ago and burned much of the area around the city. In the meantime, he was probing the city's defenses from both land and sea. On what seemed like a usual day for them, they were suddenly surprised by the high towers as they sallied out against them. The Greyjoy King turned his troops around and they were quickly getting the better of the high towers, until Randil Tarly showed up with thousands of horsemen to attack them in the rear. He looked up from the pages and saw equal shock in the eyes of the men all around him. Half the Ironborn force was destroyed in the charge, but Euron and over 1,000 Reavers managed to retreat towards the bay while the rest scattered. Their retreat to the Arbor was cut off by the Redwyne fleet, who finally sailed into the straits. Apparently, it isn't clear what happened there, as sources mention a battle in a sea of blood and even the presence of a huge kraken arising from the deep to drag down Redwyne ships to its home. He heard many whispers at that. Krakens are nothing more than a fairy tale, some said. Others mentioned that, if the direwolves on House Stark's sigil are real, why not the krakens of the sigil of House Greyjoy? He decided to put an end to these kinds of conversations before they got out of hand. Whatever the truth of it may be, what we do know is that Lord Horror's Redwyne sailed into the straits with almost 200 warships and 700 converted merchant ships of all sizes. There he was met by some 500 Ironborn longships. In the end, over 3/4 of the Redwyne fleet were sunken to the bottom of the ocean, including Lord Horror's. His twin brother and heir managed to save some 30 warships and retreat eastwards with many other ships scattering in all directions. The Ironborn defeated the Redwyne fleet. Lord Serrit asked in shock. It seems like it. Although, it is mentioned that over half the Ironborn ships were also destroyed in the battle. He replied. This led to a huge shockwave amongst the lords. The talks weren't held in whispers now, as lords almost shouted above one another. After defeating the Red Wine fleet, the only fleet to oppose the Ironborn from Bear Island to the Stepstones was the Lannister one docked in the harbours of Lannisport now. Western lords were already debating what to do and how to protect their coastal holdings. He held up his hand and spoke loudly. That wasn't the end of it, it seems. While the Red Wine fleet failed to defeat their Ironborn counterparts, it did succeed in cutting off the Ironborn presence on land completely. Lord Randall Tarly chased King Euron Greyjoy and his reavers down towards the ruins of Blackcrown, where he defeated the Ironborn king. Euron Greyjoy was slain, after he himself mortally wounded Lord Peake and 2 of his sons. Almost all of his reavers were slaughtered during the clash. Now all just looked at him in silenced shock. The Pirate King is dead? Lord Crickehall asked. He nodded in response. What does that mean? Lord Roland continued asking. He thought long and hard on that, as he quickly reread the words in front of him. Well, it seems the Reach has lost the remainder of their naval forces. After the fleet on the Shield Islands and the Hightower fleet, the Red Wine fleet has now also been largely destroyed. This will set Willers Tyrell back decades and might even prevent him from retaking the Arbor or the Shield Islands in the near future. At the same time, the Ironborn lost their king and the vast majority of their mainland forces. After the losses taken in the north and elsewhere in the Reach, I don't expect them to have the forces anymore to seriously threaten any major keeps. They will be forced to stick to simple raiding for a while. He reread the passage where the Ironborn king was killed and continued. Their succession is once again thrown into question and it seems House Greyjoy has serious problems. Unlike last time, all brothers of Balon are now dead. We know Daenerys Targaryen burned Victorian alive after stealing 2 of her dragons, while Euron has now perished beneath Old Town. Their last brother Aeron has been reported missing for many months now, ever since Euron took the throne. The only clear heirs are Theon and Asher. However, both are safely locked away in the dungeons of Winterfell. Without them, it is likely a succession war will start for the control of House Greyjoy. A succession war between who? Lord Brynden Blackwood asked. Luckily, he had studied House Greyjoy's family tree intensely after what Theon had done to Arya. Both he and Robb had been burning with vengeance and they had wanted to know who to kill in response. A thing they had also done with House Lannister after father's death. The latter had helped them form a clear understanding of politics in the Westerlands and had indirectly helped turn many of its lords. Maybe this information now could also help them. That remains unclear. Euron is said to have had multiple bastard sons, yet they would have most likely been at his side during the battle. If any one of them survived, he could lay claim to his crown. There are also a few more distant Greyjoy lines that could try to usurp the main line for control of Pike. You also have to take into account that we are talking about Ironborn. Any of the lords might think them better than a distant or locked up Greyjoy and try to claim the Iron Isles for himself. He answered to the best of his abilities. So, what you are saying is that the Ironborn's cause will collapse into civil war? Sir Cedric Payne questioned. It most likely will in my opinion. He replied. No one said a word until the Great Jon started laughing so hard he doubled down and tears were forming in his eyes. What in the name of the Seven? Lord Brax shouted angrily towards him, many sharing the sentiment as they didn't understand the Great Jon's actions. Lord Umber, care to explain why you seem to have so much fun? He asked, an eyebrow raised. Well, the Main started, wiping away a tear from his eyes. It seems to me that both cunts just destroyed each other. The Reach has received additional damage to the area around Old Town and has lost some of its ground forces. More importantly, Willers Tyrell lost his cousin and the majority of the man's fleet and wealth. If that won't force the bloody Reachmen to the negotiation table after our little raiding campaign, I don't know whatever will. In return for their victory, the fucking Ironborn got a civil war and are back to killing each other instead of us better men. Good riddance if you ask me. All I hope is that enough of them remain on their rocks in the sea for me to satiate my thirst for revenge over my daughter once I get there. He tried to look at it from that perspective and he had to agree there was some cynical irony there that he could appreciate. He smiled softly and nodded in agreement with the Giant Lord. It does help us when 2 of our enemies destroy each other so thoroughly. So, what do we do now? Sir Gareth Clifton asked, fearful as his lands were vulnerable and closest and to the Iron Isles. Why do we have to do anything? Harry on interrupted. Let the fuckers kill themselves and we can clean up the pieces later when we got rid of Tywine. They lost thousands of men in the north and even more down in the Reach. If we let them kill each other for a few months, it won't matter if anyone wins or not. There won't be enough men left to oppose us, united or not. Sir Gareth seemed to see the merit in that and seemed happy at the prospect of less Ironborn. What about the Reach? Sir Willis Mondaly asked. With the Ironborn threat gone, they could move north and attack our garrisons and cut off our supplies from the Gold Road. He thought about that and had to agree with the heir to White Harbour. I will immediately write to His Grace to fortify the area and send additional troops over there. All agreed with that, but not all seemed content that it was enough. Will it be enough? Shouldn't we move past of our forces back to defend the entrance to the Riverlands? Sir Ronald Vance asked. I don't think Tyrell or Tarly will come north just yet. Lord Timothy Flint countered. He was the late Lord Flint's eldest son and had expertly taken over his father's mantle since he perished at the hands of the Unsullied. Why not? The heir to Atlanta asked him. Because we didn't either. When the Ironborn attacked the north, they left many garrisons and forces scattered over the western side and Moat Cailin. We first consolidated the areas they abandoned and then marched against those still left. Only after that, our forces marched against the Vale or Wildlings. Willers will do much the same. He will throw the scattered Ironborn off the mainland and will re-establish his control and that of his grandfather in the south of the kingdom. After that, he will either look to retake the Arbor and the Shield Islands or attack the Gold Road, but not sooner. Even then, I would personally try the former. Why is that? He could significantly hurt our war here in the Westerlands by cutting it sooner. Lord Lydon spoke up. He could, but what would he gain from that? In his best scenario, we move part of our army here to link up with His Grace's forces in the Riverlands to attack them. We have over 15,000 men left for the king there to rally before any serious damage is done. In the end they would have to face King Rob, who is a military genius. All that probably with an inferior force in both experience and numbers, while most of our men have rested in the Riverlands and they have sped across the Reach. Randall Tarly is good, but he is not stupid. That is not an engagement you seek for yourself. Better to get rid of the Ironborn and come north in strength to negotiate a better deal with us. And risk facing a united army of the Vale, North, Riverlands and Westerlands under King Rob in a few months. Sir Roland Wainwood asked. In negotiations. Better that than to stand there while everybody knows you don't even control your entire kingdom. The new Lord of Flint's finger shrugged. I agree with Timothy here. The Great Jon shouted, as he slapped the man on the back while Small John showed his support as well. House Umber and House Flint had been great friends under the late Lord. It seemed that friendship carried over to the next generation. I am inclined to follow your reasoning as well, Lord Flint. He finally spoke up. Yet, I will write to Rob nonetheless. Maybe additional reinforcements will further discourage them from moving north towards our supply line. Lord Timothy nodded in acknowledgement and all others seemed placated. This will be all for today, my lords. A city awaits our capture. 6 days later. He had done it. He had actually done it. He had captured Lannisport in a week's time. He still couldn't believe the plan had worked. 3 days ago, he had noticed the sigil of House Swyft on guards patrolling the walls on the western side of the city. A plan had formed in his head then. He had had Willem write a letter to his grandfather detailing his complete amnesty and council position, as well as his grandson's eternal gratitude for him and his uncles and cousins. All he had to do is open a gate to the city. It had apparently been enticing enough, not surprising with 12,000 men camped outside the city and more than 7,000 a little further before Casterly Rock. Sir Hayes had opened a western gate in the middle of the night and hundreds of his men had entered it before any alarm had even been raised. What had followed had been a fierce struggle at night through the streets. When the night fell away for the day, the enemy finally saw what they were up against. Over half his force had entered the city and more were pouring in. An hour after dawn, the last of the lords had surrendered his troops. The only holdouts had been some of the local houses of Lannisport, almost all cadet branches of House Lannister. Their fortified houses and small keeps in the city were easily stormed in the 2 hours that followed. Houses Lannister of Lannisport, Lantel, Lannet and Lanny had all been taken into custody. He was already pressuring King Willem to send all able-bodied men of these houses to the wall. The less Lannisters, cadet branch or otherwise, the better. It was time someone starting severely culling this God's-forsaken family. It was now midday and he rode into the city next to King Willem in a show of strength. In front of them in the central square stood Sir Harris Swyft. He went to his knee at the sight of his grandson. "Your Grace, the city is yours." He spoke up. Willem simply jumped from his horse and walked over to the Knight of Cornfield. He pulled him up and hugged him. "It's good to see you, grandfather. I have need of your counsel." The smile the elder knight bore on his face was true and genuine, that much was clear. He must really care for his grandson. Good, it will help their cause. All along the town, guards in Lannister Red took command of the city's most important buildings, while other Westerlander guards went to the walls in a show of force. The message to the locals was clear. "We are one of you, we are the real Westerlanders. We have freed your city." After all that had happened, Willem was welcomed with unsure applause by the citizens of the city. They all hated Tywin by now, with forced conscriptions, soldiers coming back without their sword hands, if they came back at all, extra taxes and the refusal to open the gates to the refugees. After he had made the city a battlefield, he had lost the last support. Yet, the welcome wasn't wholehearted and he was the reason why. He, Ghost and his few guards stuck out against the sea of red and all knew what it meant. Still, no shouts of complaint were made. Ghost's silent snarl probably had something to do with that. The rest of the day was spent seeing to a lot of decorum, while Willem toured the city. They also spoke together to the lords, who had surrendered, and he managed to force Willem into sending the men from the cadet branches to the wall. Their underaged children would be fostered in Casterly Rock. A clever idea by Lord Westerling, who of course wanted to secure his daughter's place as queen and her future progeny after that. After a meeting with their commanders, where they discussed their losses which had only been around 600 men, he ordered many of them to prepare to move most of the camp. Initially 7,500 men had opposed Casterly Rock with 12,000 surrounding Lannisport. Now, that would change. 16,000 would oppose Casterly Rock, with 3,000 Westerlanders taking their place inside the city. Everything had gone insanely quickly that day. They were already planning Willem's official coronation in the September of Lannisport with all the lords of the West present. It had been Sir Harris' idea and he had immediately started to portray Willem as the prince of the city. It seemed to work on the people, so he let it be. He had more important things to do. Equally as important as the fall of the city, had been the fall of its stores to his army. He had negotiated with King Willem and together they had decided half would be emptied to feed the forces, while the other half would be reserved for the local population to make sure they wouldn't starve. Tywin had stocked the stores for a siege lasting 2 years, they still had more than enough. He would spend a small part to feed the refugees to both strengthen Willem's and his own image. He would not conquer these lands simply to let them think of him and his friends as savages. He had to diminish anti-northern sentiment as much as possible, if he wanted peace to hold for the next 30 to 40 years. The campaign in the Reach had done wonders with much of the nobility. Those that had only recently joined were quickly being won over by how he had captured Lannisport and his treatment of Sir Harris and the other lords that had surrendered as well as the local population. He had stopped his men from doing any substantial looting, it had frustrated some of them but it had won him the benefit of the doubt from much of the local people. Now he would continue sieging Casterly Rock for however long it would take. It would probably take many months if he was honest. Because of that, he would have time to start setting up Willem's reign from Lannisport. He would facilitate that the 7 miles of lands would be handed over to Robb's units. He would see to it that the freed lords paid their ransoms, Willem included. He would overlook the preparations of the coronation and the marriage of Willem, which would take place in the September here in a few weeks or so. Jane had come with them to the Westerlands, albeit only in the rearguard. She was now staying in Deep Den, as an army camp was no place for a future queen, and would soon be brought over. He would allow the Westerlords full autonomy on all of it, as long as he was kept in the loop the whole time. He would bring a clear message, transparency and goodwill would bring them autonomy. He would also see to it that Willem immediately forbade the Faith Militant, as they were already springing up all over the kingdom. Lord Westerling had even mentioned that they could repay the Iron Bank with the valuables they found in the vaults of Lannisport. The sudden belief in victory was immense, and both the city and army were positively buzzing. Yet, he knew it wasn't over yet. As long as Tywin lived, he would never be able to rest. So, he would soon see him dead. He would avenge father and ensure the future safety of his siblings and their children and grandchildren. Maybe, just maybe of his own children and grandchildren too. For the first time he really started to believe in Robb's plan for him. He started to hope for a keep, a wife, children, a family of his own. A place to be himself, not part Stark and part Targaryen, but fully himself. A place to build his own legacy and fuse the best of both lineages. A chance to go north and build himself a home. Chapter 64, Ruling over the Riverlands. 301 AC. Robb. He looked outside the window of the Tully Solar to the streams and fields below the castle. He could see the winter sun reflect on the cold water. The image brought him peace every time he looked at it. If he turned his head, he could see his army camped more to the west. Well, a small part of his army that was. Most were off somewhere. Jon had taken 9,500 of his men to the Westerlands or scattered them around in garrisons in the Reach lands above the Gold Road. He himself had sent another 2,000 men to the area, to deter any moves the Tyrells might be thinking about. Most other Riverlanders and Crownlanders were at home. They were restoring their keeps and rebuilding their towns and villages. Thousands of his Northmen had either joined them or they were helping them in gathering crops or resources. Most help was done by gathering large amounts of wood to rebuild all the building that had been burned down. Other groups had been sent with the aim of defeating any rebel or bandit groups in the area, and sadly those had been many. This only left 2,000 loyal men below the walls of Riverrun. Uncle Edmure had thanked him profusely for sending away most of them, as the constant supply of tens of thousands of men had been straining his people and stores. He constantly helped to refresh their stores, yet he understood it made House Tully uneasy. Especially now, with another supply line running towards Casterly Rock and Lannisport being established to help out. A great feast had been held when they heard the news of the latter's easy fall. All had celebrated as if the war had already ended. He understood them, but he had no time to celebrate. These lands he looked upon would never be safe, if he didn't do anything about it now. He walked back again towards the desk and the maps scattered around it. He had spent weeks identifying all problems of the Riverlands. He had talked with many nobles big and small about a multitude of issues and ideas to counter them. He had even spoken with a few of the common folk. In the end he had identified two types of problems. Problems the Riverlands had had for centuries and which needed structural long-time solutions, and urgent matters that, if solved well, wouldn't be of any concern for his sons or grandsons when their time to rule came. He identified 5 timeless issues. First and foremost, there was the comparative weakness of House Tully. In all of the kingdoms, the ruling house was the strongest, with perhaps 1 or 2 houses coming close to them. Not in the Riverlands, where houses Blackwood, Bracken, Free, Mallister and before Robert's rebellion also Dare had been stronger than them. He would need to find a way to strengthen his uncle's house, without endangering his own interests in the Riverlands. Secondly, there was the constant disunity in the Riverlands. Their whole history consisted of some houses betraying others and allying with invaders. Never had House Tully managed to rally the whole of the Riverlands in the last 300 years. He had united them and protected them against the Lannisters, but in spite of that some houses had still betrayed him. With their common enemy soon gone, he needed to do something about this, or he and his uncle would soon face rebellion. Thirdly, there was the Blackwood-Bracken feud. Many wars had been fought because of it, and even when they fought together it weakened the cohesion of the army. It needed to stop. Measures needed to be taken to end it for good, even though both families told him it had been tried before and always just flared up again after a generation or two. Fourthly, there were the religious problems. The Blackwoods, most of their vassals and a few minor knightly houses that were scattered around were the only ones who still held strong to the old gods. Now, with his ascendancy to the crown of the Trident, religion would surely be a reason for strife once more. To talk about this, Sir Lucas Blackwood would soon arrive to advise him. Apparently, he had some light to shed on the situation. Lastly, you had the geographical location of the kingdom. It was locked between the North, the Vale, the Westerlands, the Reach and the Storm Kingdom, while the Ironborn threatened it from the sea. The only kingdom that wasn't a threat to its safety was Dawn. This was the sole reason they had come off so easy in the negotiations. He had been working hard to search for solutions on all of these problems. Some, he had already thought of before and were already being implanted. Others were new and still needed to be discussed and planned out. Many things had been discussed with John on the march, however, he had spent the last few weeks thinking how to implement his ideas. Then there were the second kind of problems. Things that needed to be fixed now or they would instantly endanger the security of the Riverlands. Many a night had been spent with Riverlords and especially his uncles to discuss these issues. Firstly, he had to decide what to do with the traitorous houses. He would punish them severely and reward his followers, but he couldn't reward anyone too much and risk destroying the balance of power. A very difficult balancing exercise which had held him awake for many nights at a time. Secondly, there were the successions of the houses that were close to extinction. Houses Hayford and Stokeworth had only unwed female heirs left before their lines ended. The Rosby line's fate was even worse, with no clear heir to speak of. Thirdly, there was the destruction of the lands due to the war. Already, Maidenpool, Stony September and Solpants were being resettled. Their houses were re-erected, their walls were rebuilt and bodies were buried. However, not only the cities were hit. All the lands south of the Red Fork were ravaged. Its keeps and holdfasts razed, its farms set ablaze and abandoned and its population decimated. Many of the people had fled north to Riverrun, Seaguard or other castles. These people were now returned to their homeland and helped with restarting their lives. Yet even then, over 1 million people would never return home. A sickening number, all taken to the grave by hunger, disease or the malicious deeds of their enemies. The tens of thousands of people being resettled from King's Landing would greatly help to replenish the lands, although their integration would take a lot of time and hard work as well. They would need to quickly assimilate in the Riverlander culture, not an easy feat to accomplish in that great a number. This hung closely together with the fourth issue, the integration of the Northern Crown lands into the Riverlands. Any sense of feeling of being a Crownlander would need to disappear. They would need to act and feel like Riverlanders now. As long as they felt distinctive from the others, unrest would be rising under the surface. Fifthly, there was the case of the former Targaryen loyalists. They had been heavily punished by Robert Baratheon and Hoster Tully and there was still some resentment there because of it. If he wanted the Riverlanders to be united, he would need to make sure they let go of all this resentment. The amount of work in front of him had been dizzying, but he was finally getting somewhere. As if the gods had heard him, his work once again continued with a knock on his door. "Sir Lucas Blackwood is here to see you, Your Grace." One of his loyal guards shouted from outside the door. "Thank you, let him in, Windle." The Riverlander knight walked in and after a loyal bow, both of them embraced as the friends they were. From all the Riverlanders, Sir Lucas had been the one who had best adapted to the presence of the Northmen in his homeland. He was friends with nearly all of them and helped bridge relations between them and his countrymen, especially his lordly brother. "Your Grace, I thank you for taking the time to listen to me. I know you are very busy." He started speaking, as he nudged towards the maps on the desk. He held up his hand. "It is no problem, Lucas. I'm eager to hear what you wish to speak of." "Well, I have heard you speak of repopulating the Riverlands many times. I have also heard some Northmen speak in hushed tones about the limited presence of the old gods in these lands. Other ones have been discussing a possibility to stay here in the south, instead of returning home and straining their families' resources for winter. I have been present at discussions on either one of these subjects. However, what would it have to do with you, sir?" He responded suspiciously. If this would cause any more possible strife between the Riverlanders, he would have to nip it in the bud as soon as possible. "Well, I was wondering how familiar you were with the widow fairs in the Riverlands after the Dance of Dragons, Your Grace. Especially their aftermath and how their descendants live now. It is closely connected to my family's history, so I thought it'd be good if I would explain it to you. Maybe it can help you to solve all these problems at once. The Blackwood Knight answered his question. HMMN, the Widow Fairs. His friend nodded. I know my ancestor Lord Cregan Stark went south in the Dance of Dragons with an army that consisted for a large part of childless and unwed men. Older men and younger sons with no future in the north. As the army had fought no battles, most were still alive at the end of the war. They feared to become a burden, if they went back home. Many wished to remain in the south and organized weddings were held in the Riverlands with the widows of men fallen in the war. Together these new couples helped resettle the Riverlands. I think that's about it. That is exactly right, Your Grace. Under the impulse of Lord Cregan's new wife Alisanne Blackwood, a kinswoman of mine, these so-called widow fairs were held at the Twins, Stony September, Fair Market, Raventree Hall and Riverrun. The latter two benefited the most of it, as most of the 5,000 Northmen settled in the lands of Houses Blackwood and Tully. The knight laughed, emphasizing his own family as the reason why he was telling this to him. He motioned for him to continue his story. After the war, the Riverlands were blessed with 60 years of peace and prosperity. Sadly, this is a rarity in our history. Except for the conquest of Dawn, we weren't involved in any wars and never were our homes looted or our crops burned. This led to a huge population boom after the war. Everywhere the population grew at an incredible rate, among them the descendants of the couples made by these widow fairs. They rejuvenated the population of the old gods believers in the Riverlands. By the time the first Black Fira rebellion came along, the number of their descendants had risen to over 80,000 people. Some would assimilate and convert, but most would not. During the Black Fira rebellion and future wars, some pious lords tried to get rid of their flourishing communities and many of them fled to our lands. We accepted them with open arms, as they strengthened both our house and our religion. As you know, most small folk usually remain on the same lands they were born on generation after generation. Yet, throughout the years, we made it a point to accept landless younger sons and uncles of these descendants in our lands. This suited us, as we became stronger, the small folk itself, as we gave them better chances in life, and the lords they left, as it limited the growth of and their problems with these communities in their lands. As such, many of their descendants have come to live with us and our lands have prospered. However, many still remain scattered around the Riverlands. This caught him off guard. He knew many old gods believers still dwelled in the Blackwood lands and had even heard some saw it as their sanctuary, but he didn't know of the other communities. I have asked around in the circles of the lower nobility how these communities are doing and have demanded any notes my father and grandfather had on them at our home. In the end, I can conclude that before the war these communities were still very much alive and even thriving. Especially at the other 4 other places these fairs had been held. Sadly, the community that had peacefully existed to the southwest of Stony September was completely wiped out during the war. A combination of Lannisters, hunger and zealots using the chaos has barely left any of them alive. Even so, the large communities in the Free, Tully and Peage lands still hold strong and smaller ones are scattered in the lands of neighboring families. House Blackwood even seems to have had a history of marrying into these houses after wars, like the Black Fira rebellions, that had depleted our manpower. As part of the dowry, these houses would send some members of these communities our way to replenish our numbers with good old gods believing Riverlanders. Although very interesting, he still didn't understand where his friend was going with this. He expressed as much to him. Sir Lucas only grinned. Well, this is your solution, Your Grace. What is? He frowned. Widow fairs. You can hold widow fairs for those Northmen not willing to go back north again. I think I can safely say that you are planning to reward some of your loyal, old gods-believing countrymen with lands in the south. Organize widow fairs and move those willing of the existing communities towards those lands. It would give a future and a home to those wishing to stay here. It would help repopulate those areas with loyal men in the prime of their lives ready to help rebuild the area, and it would help strengthen the situation of the old gods south of the neck as well help integrate the Northmen. It would also lessen the conflict of the nobles you rewarded ruling over an entire population of 7 believers. He looked in shock at his friend. It would indeed help to solve all of those problems in one move. It would be a stroke of genius that would satisfy and help everyone except one group. What about the pious 7 believers in the south? We would anger them greatly with this. He expressed his concerns. Sir Lucas shrugged. Probably, but most of them are dead or their families too weakened to do anything about it right now. The old Lord Vance of Wayfarer's Rest is dead, Lord Cale is young and less zealous than his father. His distant cousin the Lord of Atlanta is broken after the death of his 2 sons, and we all know what happened to his lands. Lord Piper lost his heir and his lands have been ravaged by war. Old Lord Leicester is almost senile and his heir is the underage grandson of one of his cousins. House Bracken's lands were burned by the Lannisters and House Mouton is reduced to a young boy in the custody of Lord Edmure with a town that needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. If there was ever a time to do this, it is now. He listened to his friend's plea and couldn't help but agree. However, that didn't chance the fact that once these houses had gotten back up, the threat would remain. What about the future? Once these houses have replenished and are strong again, by then, all these nobles you have rewarded would be strong and settled in as well. My brother will be more than willing to ally with them, as will other more moderate houses. In the end, the Riverlands would be once again divided, and if they are so stupid as to try anything, you can come south with tens of thousands of Northmen to settle the issue once and for all. Besides, we won't be converting the whole of the land. I just think it would be beneficial if my house isn't the only sanctuary for our beliefs south of the neck. It leaves us and our people isolated and surrounded. He thought about that. It was true that as long as the Blackwoods were the only major house to not believe in the 7, some would ostracize them. The only reason they were still here was because of their power and might, as many had tried to bring them down before. If he had a handful of lords like that, it would weaken any organized resistance the New Gods believers would ever want against his house. He was sure surrounding kingdoms would always try to use religion to destabilize his realm or even use it as a precursor to invade. It could also help unify the Riverlands in the long term, although strife in the earlier stages would most likely be unavoidable. I thank you for your intelligent counsel, my friend. You have given me a lot to think about, he said to the Blackwood Knight, dismissing him from the Solar. The idea was sound, but it had also confirmed his belief in his friend as well. The knight deserved to be rewarded and he would do well in his new functions. He spent the rest of the day calculating and overthinking the implications it would have on his plan. He subtly spoke of parts of it with Lords Deddings, Roderick Umber and Sir Robert Peach. All gave interesting viewpoints on certain topics he was still unsure about, and it also served as a means to measure their intellect. After dinner he called both his uncles to the Solar. After weeks of planning, it was finally time to make some important decisions. To do this effectively, he needed the support of his uncle Edmure as Lord Paramount of the Riverlands. He intentionally invited Uncle Bryndon as well, as he had a great influence on his other uncle and always gave sound advice. When they entered, he offered them all a glass of Arbor Gold. Since their raiding into the Reach, they had hundreds, if not thousands, of barrels of the Arbor stuff. He greeted them and sat down at the table in the middle of the Solar with his uncles. He had very consciously not taken his place on the Lord's seat, as it might insult Uncle Edmure. The fact he had appropriated his Solar for weeks now must be hard enough. Uncles, I have need of your counsel, your guidance and also of your consent on a lot of the measures I am planning for the Riverlands. I need House Tully to agree to the reforms to make sure the Riverlands will replenish quicker and stronger from these hardships than ever before. I have asked for your guidance many times in the progress of creating my proposals, now is the time to finally decide everything. It is my plan that we together redesign the Riverlands of the future. Houses Stark and Tully, my family, will rule these lands now, without any interference of outside lords or kings, and tonight we create this new world. He spoke up solemnly. Sir Bryndon just raised his eyebrow. I say this with the uttermost respect, your grace, but just because you are technically my grandnephew doesn't mean you need to make every sentence you tell us part of some grand speech. Just get on with it and let us talk of the measures at hand. Edmure almost spit out his wine laughing at the remark, and he couldn't hide his own smirk at the words of his mother's uncle. All right, grand uncle, if that's what you want, I will oblige. He responded with a mock bow. All three laughed at that. It was a weird dynamic. He and Edmure were the most important nobles of his kingdom, while the Blackfish was as renowned and respected as anyone ever could be. Yet, when push came to shove, they were all just family. Family, duty and honor were the wise house words of House Tully, in that order. The words of his mother, and because of that also a little bit his own. That's what they would do tonight. They would do their duty and they would do it honorably, but still family came first. He explained them the long-lasting and very topical issues he saw for the future of the Riverlands. Uncle Brendan agreed with all of them, while Uncle Edmure only made a problem of the religious issues. He had anticipated that. Just like his mother, he had been very zealously educated in the light of the Seven. To create some goodwill, he first discussed the weak position of House Tully. House Tully needs to become stronger. You need additional lands and incomes. No one was happier with that than the new Lord of Riverrun. What do you have in mind? Sir Brendan asked. You will of course get the 7 miles of Westerlands territory that borders your own, but I want to go further. If you both agree, I plan to give some of the lands of House Goodbrook to Riverrun directly. I marked them here on the map. He told them, as he handed them a parchment. More specifically, it concerns the villages of Cornby, Creeksbend, Wellsbridge, Wellsbank and Forgerberry. The lands of Pasture Hill and Meadowbank all the way to and including Battletown. The holdfasts of Creek Tower, Swampfast and Troutbend. The cascades of Shellers Tears and nearby Shellers Forest. Also included are the moneymakers of Flowers Mill and the Beesong Hives. The 100 or so scattered farmsteads in between those lands are of course also included. The Blackfish whistled. This is 1/5 of the lands of House Goodbrook, not a small gift. Why not simply transfer all the lands of House Goodbrook to us? It would make us the strongest house in the Riverlands with a single stroke of ink, and you would never have to worry about your first concern. The Lord of Riverrun asked him greedily. No, that wouldn't do. He replied resolutely. It would change the power dynamics in the Riverlands too drastically and would create concern and jealousy among your bannermen. House Tully would also be seen as greedy and opportunistic, which we can't have. Besides, the keep of House Goodbrook is too great a castle to be reduced to a mere holdfast. I have plans to gift it to someone else. You want to end House Goodbrook? Sir Brendan asked him in shock. I plan to end most of the houses that betrayed us at Atlanta. A clear message will be made to any who dare to stab us in the back. If you betray House Stark, you and your family won't survive this. However, we digress. This will be discussed in detail later on in the evening. Both seemed pleased enough by this and let it go. So, these lands come directly under Riverrun? Uncle Edmure asked, circling the area on the map. Aye, it will significantly strengthen House Tully and bring in much appreciated extra coin. 20 years ago, you were behind houses Blackwood, Bracken, Free, Mallister and Dare in strength. Now, you would only need to leave houses Blackwood, Bracken and Mallister in front of you, and with these lands the gap will have become significantly smaller. He replied. Lord Edmure seemed pleased at the result, while Sir Brendan seemed to appreciate the diplomatic implications of it all. I also have another proposal to strengthen House Tully directly. He continued. There is more? Sir Brendan asked. He nodded and turned towards Uncle Edmure. House Went has gone extinct. Your mother was one of the possible heirs. If you discount all of those which married into House Free and their descendants, she becomes the only possible heir. As such, I think it reasonably if you were to inherit Harrenhal. You would give me Harrenhal. On top of expanding Riverrun's lands. The smile that split his uncle's face really was a sight to see. Aye, but on 2 conditions. You are to pass it on to your second son at the latest at his 20th birthday. If you fail to have multiple sons or only one Tully line were to remain, the lands will go to either Bran or Rickon through our mother's line. What happens before I have fathered a second son or before he comes of age? You would be Lord of Harrenhal and you have to appoint someone to oversee its workings. This is also the second condition, that you spend coin and effort to rebuilding and repopulating those lands. If you wish to tear down part of the castle to make it more affordable, I will allow it, but send me the plans before you start anything. He replied. Edmure agreed very quickly. He looked as happy as a child on his name-a-day. Now, to stay on the topic of fathering sons. I had an idea to start solving the disunity and the Blackwood-Bracken feud, but it would need your approval, uncle. He started to explain, while turning himself to his mother's younger brother. My approval. How come? He replied. Marriage has the possibility to unite many houses. Just look at what we have achieved together simply because my parents married and got me. Lord John O's has 5 daughters and no true-born sons. I will propose that his oldest daughter and heir Barbara marries his nephew Henry. The lad has shown himself capable during the war and it will ensure the Bracken bloodline and name for the future. At the same time, I will propose that you marry her sister Jane and Lord Bryndon Blackwood marries the 3rd daughter Caitlin Bracken. It would bond houses Blackwood and Bracken together with not only each other, but their overlords as well. I would be surprised if they refused the